You're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. Because, of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. Want to be fooled.
Hello and welcome once again to the Cine-Files, where we are entering the season of Christopher Nolan. My name is Steve Morris. I'm a filmmaker and directing instructor in Los Angeles, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is John Rocha. I'm a writer, producer, host, and voiceover artist in San Diego, California. Sometimes I forget what my intro is, but dude, I have to tell you this right off the bat. This is the most daunting I have felt walking into any season of any director we've ever done, and that includes Coppola. There's just something about Nolan that requires you to stand at attention and really treat this with the seriousness that a man of his talent and abilities deserves. And so I hope we do him justice in our conversation, and I'm confident that we'll do him justice in our movie breakdowns. But I'm also preparing for this in a way that I've never prepared before. I'm like Mr. T in Rocky 3. I'm doing pull-ups off wooden beams in my basement to get ready for this.
All right, paper champion.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like every time we've done a season of a director, it has been a different journey, because these are very, very different people. And Nolan, yeah, I feel I was not intimidated. I was really sad to go into Rob Reiner's life.
Right, of course.
But I wasn't intimidated. Rob Reiner is as accessible as you can get.
Yeah,
you know,
100%.
Nolan is not, you know.
No, Nolan requires more of you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he absolutely does. And by the way, we should say that we could not be doing this season or any season of a director without our incredible supporters on Patreon, as well as on Apple Podcasts, where they can be listening to ad-free versions of the show, as well as our Cine-Files shorts, participate in our advisory board, and get other stuff. And we just released some things on our free tier, and I believe we are about to launch another sale on Patreon. Details to come, because we're still working them out, but that should be coming very, very soon.
Absolutely. And you know, for those of you who listen to us not on the ad-free tiers, and you hear the ads when the show plays, we love and appreciate you all as well, because it takes a village to keep our show going. And so for those of you who do listen to it, if you hear any ad and product and service that you want to try out, please make sure you use our code to do so, because you get a bunch of money off or a percentage off, and you signal to these people to keep coming back and supporting us here on the Cine-Files. We're talking Hims, Quince, True Diagnostic, BetterHelp, all running ads with our show right now. So we can't thank them enough, and we can't thank you all enough for listening to us, especially as we walk into a new season of a director here.
So, John, I have a very important question for you.
Oh, crap.
How did you first come to Christopher Nolan?
Oh, Memento. Absolutely. You know, the thing is, loving films like we do, Steve, when a new voice gets touted to us before we even see what they can do, especially by magazines, because this is at the time when you could read the magazines and they were like, well, I was at this festival and this is the film. And so many people were talking about Memento, and I saw the trailer. And I love Carrie-Anne Moss. I love Guy Pearce coming out of LA Confidential. So there was a lot of things to attract me to this trailer and the idea of what the story was about. This guy piecing his memory together. So the mystery of it all. So there was so much about that already appealed to me. And you add and tell me through these movie reviewers and critics that this is a new voice that people need to pay attention to. Then me, as a burgeoning film critic myself at the time, was very excited to go into the theater and see this movie. Probably saw it opening weekend, and that hooked me to the name Christopher Nolan all the way till now. What about you?
I definitely didn't see it opening weekend. I was never a film magazine guy like you were.
Interesting.
I never really did. I mean, I read them sometimes, but I didn't subscribe. I didn't get them every week. And this was one of those movies where after the opening weekend, I could remember everybody was talking about it. Wow. And I went to see Memento probably the second weekend in the theater. Man, you're 100% right. This is the announcement. While it isn't his premiere film, which is the following, this is the announcement of, this guy is the real deal. Because Memento, and we'll get to it as we go through his career, ain't like any other movie. you know?
Yeah.
So I wanted to go through some biographical material, and I actually found a really good book on Christopher Nolan, written by someone who knows him well, and it's really good. It goes all the way up to Tenet. So I wish it went a little bit further, but it was super interesting. And the reaction I had as I was starting to learn about Christopher Nolan is that it's sort of like something that came up when we did Hitchcock, and something we came up that came up with Quentin Tarantino, which is that for those guys, there is a very specific kind of film, a specific style, a specific worldview for both Hitchcock and Tarantino. And both of them kind of go back to childhood. And that with Hitchcock, it was the story of him being brought to a jail at 5 years old, not knowing the reason why. The policeman put him in a cell and gave him a note that says something like, "This is what happens to boys who are naughty," or something like that. Never knew the cause, but that is all of his films are about guilt, about being mistaken for someone else, about not knowing what's going on, about not knowing whether you're the good guy or the bad guy, or, you know, that's Hitchcock. And then Tarantino, it is that era of men coming into his mother's life and going to these films in the 70s. That is what formed him. And Nolan is super interesting to me. Like one of the things I never knew, I mean, maybe you did, is that I always just think of him as British. But no, he's British American. His mother was a flight attendant, and so he went back and forth a lot and spent some of his. And what he said, there was a quote that was something like, he was never quite sure if he was an American pretending to be British or British pretending to be American. Because wherever, go ahead.
We call that the Madonna disease, but yes, absolutely.
Because wherever he was out of place. He was playing a role. And you see that playing a role and duality and not fitting in or not quite understanding the reality is throughout all of Nolan's films, you know?
Yeah, this is the thing that I always talk about with him, because I agree with you. Sometimes I forget that he's partly American. I know there are a lot of British film fans who are adamant that he is British and solely British, but he did grow up being influenced by American and British culture. And I think that's a positive, because I think a lot of that comes through in the work he creates. It is elevated, as sometimes we see some of the British films have that certain elevation to it, but it also has a very populist, mainstream pop culture approach to it, which a lot of American films that are successful do in terms of pop culture, in terms of tentpole pictures, as we've talked about many times on the show. So it may be that this back and forth upbringing allowed him to appreciate both approaches, and in a lot of subconscious ways, is part of the reason why he makes the films that he makes in the styles that he does.
Well, it's so interesting because the movies that are important to him coming up really tell a lot about where he ends up. I mean, he saw Star Wars. He's a couple of years younger than me. He saw Star Wars when it came out.
Right.
But then I think a few days after that, his dad took him to see a screening of 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I mean, Kubrick's a big deal for Nolan. And 2001, which he later restored and put out a 70 millimeter version in the theaters, that was Christopher Nolan doing it, because that movie is so important to him. And there's so many elements of 2001 that you can see scattered throughout Nolan's films.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
Here's an interesting thing. So his dad was an ad executive and worked at a very, very prominent firm in London with very, very prominent people in the ad world. And as Christopher Nolan is getting a little older and starting to say directors that he likes, particularly someone like Ridley Scott, his dad would say, "Oh yeah, I worked with him in the ad agency," because and this is what I had forgotten, but we've actually talked about this multiple times. So Ridley Scott started out in advertising in the 70s, working along with Alan Parker, who we talked about when we did The Commitments, and also Hugh Hudson, who did Chariots of Fire.
Right.
And apparently Nolan's dad was with them at the exact same time.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
That is, wow. Wow. Okay.
And like we've heard about Steven Spielberg, like we heard about the Coen brothers and a bunch of other people, he got that Super 8 camera when he's like 7 years old and starts making movies. And the movie, and what he's doing is basically like I'm trying to remember what it was, but but I think it was the Coen brothers who basically made shot for shot some film that they liked. Well, Christopher Nolan was making science fiction, space movies, things like that, and apparently his dad had a buddy who worked like at the archive department at NASA, and so he gave him Super 8 copies of actual NASA footage that had never been used that Christopher Nolan cut into his movies when he's like 10 years old.
That's incredible. Look at that.
Yeah. And the thing is, it sounds like Nolan's upbringing, mostly like his schooling was classic British border prep school. Like that's the stuff in the suit and tie. That's the stuff he was doing. And as he goes into college, he wants to do film. His father, as you would imagine, is pushing him to do something more reasonable. He's studying English literature. And right around this time, I think, just as he's finishing up school and really wants to be a filmmaker, Pulp Fiction comes out. And and I think I couldn't tell because of the way that it was written in this book. It might be that he actually read the script for Pulp Fiction before seeing in the movie. But either way, this movie made a huge impression on him. And in particular, of course, its nonlinear nature. This is something that, Nolan is obsessed with. And one of the things he says about things being nonlinear, which I found really interesting, is that he's like, it's basically, he talks about the tyranny of linear filmmaking. Because, and what you think about, it's funny, this came up recently when we were doing Deadpool, of the difference between comic books and movies, where in a comic book, you have all these panels that are separated over space. In a film, you have one image and it's changing over time. It is always moving forward. You can never go back when watching a movie. It's always the next frame, the next frame, the next frame. And Nolan is like, that's not how we experience life. And here's the example that he gave that I found super interesting, which is, and I'll put this sort of into modern terminology, but like, let's say there's some big event and you first see it on social media, like you see a little tiny headline. And then you go, well, I'm going to go look at the New York Times. And so you go to the New York Times and it starts with the headline, which says, this is what's happening. And then the article goes back in time. It usually starts, maybe the first paragraph will be kind of a summary. And then it goes back in time and fills in the details. So you actually were in the front of the time with the tweet or whatever. And then the headline puts you in one place. Then you got a summary where you saw the whole thing. And then you went back and got more detail about all of it, which is also, by the way, connected to another movie that's very, very important for Christopher Nolan. And that, of course, is Citizen Kane, where you have a summary of the guy. And then you have an event with the death, and then the summary of the guy with the newsreel, and then we go back and fill in all the details. And what Nolan says is it doesn't end there, because let's say it's an important story, like a war or an attack or a terrorist attack or something like that. Well, you're going to continue to fill in those details for weeks or months, maybe 10 years from now. You read a book on the topic, and then you see a documentary on the topic. None of that is linear. And so what his thing is, we're actually experiencing the world in a nonlinear fashion all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also it speaks to the approach of the intellectual approach to things, because you want to know the context. You want to know the perspective. And that's the things we kind of complain about nowadays, is that people just grab the soundbite and run with it. They don't read the article. They don't explore the headline a little bit further to find out if the headline is actually accurate, or a summation, or a titillation to get you to read the article. They just grab those words and then run with it and claim it as fact. And that's what I think is fascinating about Nolan, and why so many of us who love Nolan appreciate it, because he's all about taking us back and forth through time to fill out and flesh out the overall point of the film and what these characters are doing with the film and the events within the films themselves. So for us, we've grown to be confident that Nolan is going to take us into the places he needs to take us and give us the information we need when we need to have that information. It's almost like he can read where the audience's crescendo of the desire for more information happens, the peak of the crescendo, and is there to give you that information so you come back down and you're ready to go on to the next phase of the film. So it is absolutely a very intelligent and intellectual way to approach these kinds of things, which is why his movies appeal to me as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. So he's finishing up college, and I think in his last year he meets Emma Thomas, who becomes both his wife and his producer and main partner in all of this.
Yeah.
And I don't know much about the relationship, but what I glean from just listening to this book is this is a great partnership on both a personal and professional level, which is pretty darn cool. After university, he starts working in the, doing all the jobs. He's working as a PA. He's working as a script supervisor on industrial films. He's running the camera. He's doing everything he can. And he's also starting to make some shorts, which are getting a little bit of attention. And then it finally decides that it's time for him to make his first feature. And this is 1998, and he makes Following, which I have never seen. Have you seen this one?
Yes, I saw it a few years ago. Black and white film. I think you can watch it to see where he's gonna go, and this very much is like almost like the last gasps of what we remember of the early '90s independent film movement. There's elements of that when you watch this movie, but I don't think it's like one of these great things you need to go back and watch. In my opinion, I know a lot of people do like it. I think it's a perfectly fine movie, but I think you could see where he's going next. Like he's kind of working out the things he's going to be talking about in his future films, with a bit more money and a bit more talent to bring it to the forefront, So,
and my understanding is it has some of those elements of Nolan, of unreliable narrators, non-sequential, not exactly sure what the reality is, having to put everything together. And it does, well at festivals. Janet Maslin said it was very impressed with the film. Like this is this is not a debut movie like Reservoir Dogs. But this is, but it is a debut movie that got people interested in this guy as a filmmaker, and that brings us to 2000 in Memento. So I rewatched 2 Nolan films prior to this. That's in addition to the ones that we've decided that we're going to give the full breakdown to. And the 2 films I decided to rewatch were Memento and The Prestige, neither of which I had seen in a long time. And while I feel totally good about our decision to do Interstellar and Oppenheimer. Watching Memento and The Prestige again, I was like, I would totally do these movies too. They're both so good.
Well, a lot of our fans were pushing us to do both of those films, and some of them were a bit sad we didn't choose those 2 films to be the films we do for the season of Nolan. So I'm not surprised that you enjoyed them as well. So maybe down the road, we'll do our first ever part 2 season, part 2 of Chris Nolan. Maybe.
Again, we have all the Nolan stuff of. We're dealing with memory, duality, unreliable narrators, ambiguous and unknowable morality. We're messing with time. Yeah. This whole thing came from his brother, who's one of his regular collaborators, who had heard about this memory condition of having no short-term memory and wrote a short story based on it. And they talked about it, and Nolan said, yeah, this could make a good movie. Why don't you write a screenplay? So Jonathan, his brother, went off to write a screenplay and gives it to Christopher Nolan. And this has got to be a weird thing, because it is very clear in the things that I hear that Jonathan Nolan says about his brother and about the way their professional relationship works. I know nothing about their personal relationship, but that Christopher Nolan is the genius and he is in charge, and his brother respects and understands that from what I can see.
Yeah, and his brother has found a way to step out on his own, doing Westworld and what have you. So having written stuff with Christopher, but also stepping on his own, I think this is the thing where you realize, like, you're aware of your talent, but you are also aware of someone having more talent than you, and it happens to be your brother, and so you're going to work together. I'm sure Christopher respects him, and they have good back and forth. With Jonathan knows where he's at on the pecking order, and that's not a negative.
Not at all.
Too many people want to be alphas without having the alpha talent. Too many people think they've got the alpha talent and don't, and get jealous when someone, even their own brother or family member, has that talent. And instead of working with them and learning from them and getting better at what they can do, they just spread jealousy or try to undercut them. So I'm very happy that this is one of those rare instances where you have a brother who understands his place in the pecking order and supports him. And I'm sure they have battles over points in the script and have to defend their points and settle on where they're at. It's always a good thing.
Honestly, my respect for someone like Jonathan is huge for having the maturity and the understanding to do that and be part of these incredible artistic endeavors. Because what happens is he finishes his screenplay, his brother comes in and reads it, and I wish I had written down the quote, but there was a quote from Jonathan about watching his brother surgically and brilliantly ripping his script to pieces. And there was nothing negative in the way he said that. And I've had this experience. Most of the time when people rip you to pieces, it's not a pleasant thing. But sometimes when someone really good, it's like the light bulb, the lights turn on. You go, oh, yeah. Of course that's the better way to do it. Of course I didn't see this opportunity. Right. Of course this is the way. And you learn so much. And it sounds like Jonathan watching his brother rewrite Memento was that experience for him.
Yeah, well, if you watch Christopher in these interviews, and I know it's Hollywood and you got to, control your brand and your PR image and all of that, but when you watch Christopher in these interviews, he doesn't come off as an arrogant, condescending prick. He comes off as a guy who loves and respects movies, but he's smart and he understands them. And so even when dealing with contradictions or whatever, he's always great at writing out some of people who are challenging him on some of his points of views or some of the stuff that goes on in his movies. He's always great at explaining himself and writing out the back and forth debate on that kind of stuff. So I imagine that's an element of him and Jonathan when they work together in all of that. So yeah, there's always a better way of doing stuff that still gets the point across. It doesn't need to step on toes and stuff.
I mean, that's the impression I have on him too. He might make these totally fantastical movies that explore all sorts of crazy ideas. But when I hear him interviewed and hear how he talks about film, this guy's just really practical. He's like, how are we going to do this? This is what we're trying to do. He's also what's interesting about him, and I think this is part of the uniqueness of Christopher Nolan, is in terms of the nuts and bolts of making the movie, he is very, very practical. In terms of how he makes his choices and why, he is following, and this is something we've talked about a lot on the show, he's following his emotion. He doesn't necessarily have a logical reason. I mean, he can come up with them because he's very smart, but he's like, I just felt like we needed organ music in Dunkirk, I think it was, or no, it's Interstellar that we want the organ, like I just feel this. I'll get into some of the things that he has done with his collaborators that is super interesting in order to explore these emotional ideas. So anyway, back to Memento. Basically, now Christopher Nolan is going to take his pass on the script, pretty much a page one rewrite. And the first thought was sort of, well, I'll write it forward in time, get the whole story locked down, and then I will cut up the pieces and break it up and put everything in reverse. That's, by the way, if someone had given me the assignment, that's what I would have done. But then he immediately realized he couldn't write the movie that way because, and I think this is so brilliant, is he went, in order to write a film, I have to be feeling like the character in the film. I have to feel him emotionally, understand how he sees the world, and see the world through his eyes. Therefore, Christopher Nolan couldn't write it forward because his main character couldn't see any of those things. So he had to write this backward.
Very smart. Very smart to understand.
The other thing he said, and I find this totally fascinating, and I believe it is completely true, but takes a little bit of thinking. He says Memento is his most linear film because everything has to go in order. The end of each scene is actually takes us back to the previous beginning of the scene, and then we get back to the end of the scene again. Like everything, which means everything has to link up. You never jump. The jumps in times are exactly what they have to be, and they are always going in order, and they're always linear. It's just the line is going backwards. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. It's very smart. Yeah.
And again, the key to the movie is the emotional. What does this feel like? Not just what does this feel like for the Guy Pearce character, but how does this tell us something about how we exist in our own lives? And I think Memento has a lot to say about that.
And you can even line Memento up to what's going on nowadays. Who is telling us the truth? We don't have the information. We are in this place of discovering what's happening. Things are occurring to us as they naturally would occur to us because of our condition. And we're trying to navigate which of the people are telling us the truth so that we can get to a final end result by the end of the day that I know what's going on before it all goes away. And I think that's such a fascinating thing with what we're dealing with now, with so much misinformation or disinformation, whatever term you want to use, in how we're trying to navigate who is telling us the truth and who is not telling us the truth. and we're the ones receiving it. So we're the ones that ultimately decide if it's the truth or not for ourselves. And so there's all kinds of stuff when you're watching the film. It does a great job of having you question everybody, including the main protagonist, about what the truth is about what's going on. It's very smart.
And I also think there's something like, we like to think that we understand the world that we live in, but we only have a very partial picture of what the fuck is going on. The moment that, you and I signed on to this video call a half hour ago, had a little chit chat. I have zero idea of what was happening in your life before that. And, and I will have no idea what's happening in your life after that. I have a partial impression of who you are. And of course I have written on a Polaroid of you, don't trust him. He only lies.
True.
The other thing, and this is a lot of what Nolan is exploring, is he kind of locks into one piece of science or one conceptual idea and then explores that. And I think one of the ones with Memento, because it's so much about memory, is that, and this is pretty scientifically documented, is that when we remember a thing, we're not actually remembering the thing. We're remembering the last time we remembered the thing. And each time we remember it, we rewrite it slightly. And so our memories are not as reliable as we think they are, which is because there's something about the movie Memento that is so stressful. The not knowing and the not understanding. And what's so great about it is you get to the end, and even now I'm not going to spoil it, but I don't even think they're spoiling it, because I don't think at the end, it's not like you get, okay, and now here's everything was going on. And you don't get that. Right. You don't get to know exactly how we got to where we got to.
Because in life, you don't get to know. Not really. You think you know. You've come to an understanding that allows you to function. But a majority of the time, you don't really know. What your truth is your truth, but it may not be the truth. And I think that's the thing that you see in Memento. I also think this is a hell of a jump up from Following. I know you haven't seen it, but like Following is a good take on French New Wave, breathless type of approach to a story about memory and all of this kind of stuff and unreliable narrators. But this film is such a step up. Yet this is not the Nolan we're going to get years later.
Right.
As you said, this is a Nolan who is fixated on a certain thing, young filmmaker, still very young, figuring, yes, he's intelligent, but he hasn't had the life experience yet to go and do the things that he's going to do. Like, could you imagine Memento from Christopher Nolan now? It would be a completely different film, probably 2.5 to 3 hours, and what it's exploring in all of that, and what it's saying about memory, what it's saying about relationships, what it's saying about our relationship with ourselves and our own memory. All of that would have been, I think, much more fleshed out. But here you see this is a young filmmaker. This is the concept he has. And to me, and I'm not trying to make the comparison in terms of quality or talent, but I just saw Backrooms this week, and I highly recommend it to people. I hope you see it, Steve. And it deals with this idea of how much we remember trauma in our lives and how much that trauma is a memory of the trauma, not the actual trauma. And so the thing you're talking about is a very big deal throughout the movie. And it's not a spoiler. That's essentially what the foundation of Backrooms is. So I would be fascinated if you get a chance to see it, what you think about it, because there's a lot of what you just mentioned here with Memento that courses throughout that movie. And I wonder if Kane, who is only 20 years old, was influenced by Nolan in the way that Nolan was influenced by Tarantino, seeing the nonlinear filmmaking and messing with the idea of how we remember things and how destructive our memory of things can be, and our memory of things.
Well, I am probably going to see it this weekend, because I don't know if you know this, but my kid lives on the internet. And the internet, he told me about Backrooms. I didn't know anything about it, so he really wants to go see it. And this brings me to a thought that I had, which is we have had our ongoing debate about subjective versus objective, and I'm not trying to win the debate. But in thinking about Memento, I realized that I could explain one of the ways I see things as objective in filmmaking, and here's what it is, which is that we, strangely enough, or sadly enough, did 2 seasons of directors this year. And Rob Reiner's second film is The Sure Thing, which I totally, totally like a lot. So this is The Sure Thing versus Memento. I do not believe there is any way I could tell anybody which movie they should like more. That's totally subjective. You can love The Sure Thing and hate Memento. You can hate Sure Thing and love Memento. That's totally fine. But what I do think is one of the key differences between these films is degree of difficulty. Is that the Sure Thing is a classic romantic comedy, and there is a pattern for how to make that kind of movie that goes back to the beginning of film. And if you do that pattern competently, your movie will be good. It's not necessarily going to be great. Yes. Greatness takes a whole bunch of talent and skill and other stuff. But there is a pattern to follow. The degree of difficulty is relatively low. Memento, the degree of difficulty is off the fucking charts. It is so, because it is literally like there's no model for this. There is no movie that works like this. You are saying I'm going to make a movie that works in a way that is completely different from everything else, going backwards through time, and somehow I'm going to keep my audience emotionally involved and thrilled throughout the whole thing and engaged. Just to get to the level that the movie is okay is exceptionally hard and doesn't require, and Rob Reiner didn't have to do any of those things to make the Sure Thing. Again, subjectively, like either, don't like either. But for me, when I say there are objective things you say about films, degree of difficulty is one of the things that's in my brain.
Yeah, but I'd have to push back and say degree of difficulty is subjective because we don't know what Rob Reiner had to go through to create that film. And I would say there are films, of course, with people who lose their memory and how they try to find what their memory is and all those kinds of things. We've seen many films like that, Twilight Zone episodes like that. So there is foundational stuff. And also the fact that he's influenced by Pulp Fiction means he has a bit of a secondhand knowledge of how to mess with time and all these kinds of things. So it all matters on how subjectively you think the task is difficult or not, or more difficult than the other. But it's, again, you're never getting to give in on this. It's always going to be subjective.
I started by saying I wasn't trying to convince you of anything.
I know. I'm not.
I was trying to explain this is how I see it.
Totally.
I want to touch in on filmmakers that are important to Nolan kind of as we go along. And one of them, and this was in his education, is super important to Nolan in the way he thinks about film. And that's Sergei Eisenstein, of course, the great Russian filmmaker, the person who didn't create the montage, but he is the patron saint of the montage. He is Eisenstein is the Einstein of film montage. Einstein's big thing is what I would describe as 1 + 1 = 3, which is you have one image and it means this, and then you juxtapose it with another image that means that. But the two of them coming together create a third thing that is far more meaningful and powerful than either of these images on their own. And that's what Nolan, what he is constantly doing in all of his films, is putting things against each other in ways that they form emotions and things and ideas in us as we watch them.
All throughout Memento, that's true.
And Memento premiered at the Venice Film Festival. And obviously this is a huge, huge deal coming off of Following, which was a very small movie. Now they have, name stars. We have several people from The Matrix in the movie. And we go to the Venice Film Festival and the movie is screening and the audience is completely silent, just nothing. And they think that there's funny moments in the movie, which I think there totally are very funny moments in the movie, particularly what am I doing? Oh, I'm chasing this guy. Oh, no, he's chasing me. I mean, that's hilarious. But for whatever reason, maybe it's because, the subtitles or whatever, it just didn't translate as funny. And so Nolan is sweating bullets. He's like, oh my God, we're dying. This movie is dead. And then the movie ends, and then there is complete silence for a long time. And then the audience bursts into a standing ovation.
Wow.
Yeah. And he describes it as the most important transition moment of his life.
Of course. Because he knew in that moment that he was a filmmaker. And in that moment that what he's doing with his life has value and other people see the value. And I think that's important for a filmmaker, especially a filmmaker as intellectual as Nolan is. You can be as smart as you want, but if the public isn't going to watch your movies, you're only going to get so many opportunities to make those kinds of movies. And so the fact that people reacted in that way after that, because they probably took time to process what they had just seen, put it in context, put it in order, and then reacted to it. I think there's something really great about it.
I mean, honestly, the long pause before the standing ovation is the only thing better than the standing ovation that comes right away. I mean, like, that's a cool thing to get. So now we're off to Hollywood. Like, he is this Memento does very well. There were 6 critics that listed it as one of the top 10 movies of the year. It gets nominated for best screenplay. Like, Nolan is now on the map. Warner Brothers has this little movie called Insomnia that they cannot quite find a home for. This is the only movie, by the way, I think, that Christopher Nolan didn't write the screenplay, although he did some significant rewriting. But Warner Brothers was not interested in Christopher Nolan at all for Insomnia until a big supporter of of Nolan's, Steven Soderbergh, who was pretty hot at this moment in 2000, goes to Warner Brothers and says, "You guys are crazy. You must get this guy while you have the chance." And Warner Brothers does it. They bring on Nolan.
Yeah.
And this, it sounds like Insomnia is the transformative film for Nolan.
It's a fascinating film because it's a remake of one of my favorite foreign films that stars Stellan Skarsgård. And I remember this film, like, I remember watching this on Sundance in the late 90s because it came out in 97. And I was just blown away by the movie. So the fact that they were doing a remake with Pacino and Robin Williams, I was like, ooh, I don't know. But they brought in Nolan. And I thought it was a curious decision for him to choose a remake of a well-received and well-regarded Norwegian film and do the American version of it. To me, I was a little concerned about this, was confused about this. And of course, this was the time when Robin was starting to do more of these more serious roles, and he's the villain of the piece. And so it was fascinating to see this combination of factors coming in. And I'm curious what you said before I started talking here. Why is this the formative film as opposed to other ones that are early on in his career, including Batman, the whole Batman trilogy, which we're going to get to after this?
So first of all, I should say that I misspoke, and maybe in a telling way, at the beginning when I said that the films that I rewatched for this were Memento and The Prestige. It's not exactly true. Yeah. I didn't rewatch Insomnia because I had never seen it. So I watched it for the first time, and I think it is totally good. It's probably my least favorite of Nolan's films. You know.
Well,
oh no, it's not. No, there's one I like less.
No, right. Tenet is probably my least favorite. But what is interesting about this film, and this is what happens sometimes, young filmmakers get tossed a big studio film. They're still kind of establishing who they are. There's an opportunity to remake an intellectually interesting film like the original Insomnia that explores, you know, some really uncomfortable things that this cop does. There's some stuff in the Norwegian film that they do not touch on in this film, including the fact that that guy is hitting on his daughter's schoolmate in one of these moments in the car. And so there's just some interesting stuff that you see from that film that isn't here. But you're taking on an American remake. So it's a curious decision by him to do it. But I feel the same way you feel about this movie. This isn't one of, I don't think this is Nolan's, like, you don't, how can I say this? It's a little too mainstream for what Nolan will bring us later, which is his version of mainstream. And I think it suffers because of that. But I still think it's a very good movie. I just think when you compare it to like Oppenheimer and Interstellar and Inception, it really doesn't hold up. You know, even Memento, it really doesn't hold up.
You know what it is? It's to me, it's like the anti-Tenet. Tenet is Nolan taken to such an extreme that the movie doesn't quite work. He's way out there, and I can't quite make it there with him.
Yeah.
And this is Nolan contained. And I would rather watch,
playing it safe.
But it's very, very well made. And I realized I didn't answer your question before, but this is actually goes right to the point of it, which is that the reason this is so transformative for him is that this is the first time working for a studio. This is the first time working with a really big professional Hollywood crew. And it's the first time working with really big movie stars like Al Pacino, Robin Williams, and Hilary Swank. And he learned so much about how and I think part of that, it's probably good that the movie is a little more contained, a little less Christopher Nolan-esque, because he's figuring out how to do this stuff. And so to start with, he says he learned a ton from Pacino, just a ton. One of the things he talked about was Pacino's camera awareness, his understanding, like the thing that Nolan said is that Pacino understood how to deliver what he needed to deliver. Like he'd have the conversation with Nolan, and then Pacino would go like, I got it. And then he would do that. And Nolan is watching on the monitor and goes like, and seen all the tiny things that you've talked about all the time, all the tiny little micro adjustments, little expressions, the way the head is moving, and how much this incredible actor / movie star can convey using the great craft of acting, you know?
No surprise. No surprise. And you've got 3 top tier actors, because I would throw Robin Williams in there as well, who I think is great as the villain in this movie. And 1 Hour Photo. Those are 2 really good films where he plays a villain. But Hillary as well, who is an Oscar-winning actress coming in, and what she does with this movie. So no surprise.
I think her part is the least well written of the 3.
Oh, yeah.
Like I think Hillary has so much more in the tank that they could have used, but there just wasn't a place for her to do it. So the first thing was working with movie stars, and the second thing is working with these big crews, and that he realized, and this is the thing, is why Nolan is my kind of director, is that he's about the craft, and he's about efficiency, and he's about planning things in ahead. And so he's forming this while working with this professional crew. And the other one that I find really interesting, his approach to working with the studio is like the opposite of what we normally hear. What we normally hear is the battle between the artist and the bean counters and all the executives who all want to get their things in, and that conflict there. And what it sounds like Nolan's approach is I want the studio on my side. So first of all, that's part of why he's so efficient, and he is relatively cost effective. I mean, he's making giant fucking movies, but he isn't a money waster. He's not going off and shooting crazy things just on a whim. And the big test that happened on Insomnia was they wanted a different ending. Is they said, because you know what the ending is? There's a tragic ending, and there's like, no, we have to do it different. Yep. And Nolan never argued. Instead, Al Pacino argued. Al Pacino was furious at the idea. And Nolan's like, absolutely, we'll totally shoot that. And what he said is that because we were so happy to shoot them, and we were so accommodating, and I was so efficient, and we got the money, we handled the budget well, and we did everything well. It's not just that the studio didn't pressure them to put the alternate ending in the movie. The studio never asked to see the alternate ending. They never showed it to them.
Wow.
Yeah. And Nolan thinks that's because the studio saw me as an ally and not an enemy. And I think that's very interesting.
I think it's important. And I know we all love to go, studios, bad, burn them to the ground. But studios are the reason we even have these fucking movies. And we get to enjoy them and watch them and have them change our lives. So I know that there is a desire to vilify the studios all the time. And I'm not saying they're not deserving of criticism. But if you're a young filmmaker walking into this business, if you want to step on toes and mess with people and all this kind of stuff, you're not going to get too far. You're going to be the rarity. What Nolan realizes is, because I feel like Nolan is a self-composed, confident, intellectual guy, he sees fighting the studio as a waste of time and waste of efficiency and all of that. But listen, they're letting me do this. They're giving me the platform to do this. I'm realizing my dream as a filmmaker. So sure, I'm open to shooting the ending you want. May not be aesthetically what I think is best, but I'll work with you and do it, right? But this is the thing. It doesn't mean now forever Nolan will be a pawn of the studio. It just means in this situation, this is what I had to do. And in the future, Nolan very much decides what's in his movies. But at this stage of his career, he's still proven himself. And especially on a grand stage like this, with incredible actors like this, there's a smartness to his approach that was like, look, I'll do what you guys need me to do. I'll be efficient. I'll get it done. No worries. And so the studio now, who's so used to fighting other filmmakers, is like, oh, okay, well, yeah, sure. Do your thing if you need to do your thing. It's a smarter move on so many levels, but you have to be a very confident, self-composed person to understand how to play that game in that particular way.
Can I tell you a very strange metaphor or analogy that just popped into my head? So when I did the second Great White Shark movie, Great White Shark Beyond the Cage of Fear, which is, I think, still available on YouTube. I think they changed the name, but I'm not sure. But anyway, we had on it, and you can feel however you want to feel about this guy. But on the doc, we had Thad Lasinik, who is one of the original killer whale trainers from SeaWorld. And so, if you've seen Blackfish, you could have all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't like this guy. Very nice guy, though. Right. And here's what he said about training killer whales. He said that before they started training killer whales, almost all of animal training is dominance training, which means you kick the ass out of the animal with negative reinforcement or one way or another until the lion does what you want him to do. And yes, you do have positive reinforcement as well, but the animal has to know that you're in charge. And when you're in the water with a killer whale, what he said is there's just no way that you can convince this animal that weighs 6,000 pounds that you are in charge. So the only way to train them is entirely through positive reinforcement. You have to make the animal your friend. The animal has to be really happy to see you and want to play. But the reason this occurs to me is there is no way I can be dominant over the studio. I mean, Christopher Nolan on his third film can't beat up the studio. He has to use positive reinforcement and get the studio to like him so that they then he trains them through positive reinforcement to do what he wants them to do rather than battling them. Yeah. That seems very smart.
I mean, both Woody Allen and Clint Eastwood do the exact same things. And they never, people always like, how are they doing another movie? This is how. The studio knows they can save money, they won't be over budget, and they'll do what needs to be done efficiently and put out a product and move on to the next.
And no drama.
Yeah.
I mean,
no drama.
So strangely enough, before Insomnia came out, for whatever reason, as you will know, sometimes a buzz starts about a film that nobody has seen. And the buzz around Insomnia was bad. Like there was like people were making all sorts of predictions that this is going to be a big bomb. And Nolan describes going to a movie on because he likes to watch his movies, invisibly with real audiences. He goes on, an opening night to some theater in Westwood, and he is really freaked out because all he has heard is nobody's going to like this movie. And the audience loved the movie, like it did. And is this the biggest hit of his career? No, it isn't, but it made $13 million on a $46 million budget. It's perfectly successful, sets you up for making the next movie. And for Christopher Nolan, the next movie is going to be a biopic on Howard Hughes. I had no idea.
Is it though?
And he's developing it exactly at the same time as Scorsese's developing the biopic on Howard. And everyone's going, why are you doing this? And Nolan's going, no, it'll be great. There'll be contrasting Howard Hughes movies in the theater. It's going to be awesome. Fortunately or unfortunately, he got real stuck halfway through the script and couldn't figure out where to take the movie. But strangely enough, this rich, somewhat reclusive guy and all of his patterns found his way into another movie that Nolan was going to be working on coming soon. Apparently, somewhere around this time, and I don't have the details of the story, but it's so odd, is that apparently he's at a party, and I think Christopher Nolan was casting Jude Law in something, but I can't figure, maybe it was for The Prestige, maybe it's for something else. I'm not entirely sure, but David O. Russell was at the party and assaulted him, put him in a headlock and said, you can't poach Jude Law from me. And so the next day Nolan released him so Jude Law could go back to I Heart Huckabees or something like that.
I'm sure he regrets that with every fiber of his being.
Which one? Russell or Nolan?
Jude Law. I think he regrets not being able to go do a Nolan film and had to do that I Heart Huckabee madness.
Yeah, David O. Russell is one of those people. It's just like it's not that I think he's a bad director, but
no, he's a good director. He's just a toxic motherfucker on set.
Like.
And I'm shocked no one doesn't knock him out, man. So
So we're not going to make a Howard Hughes movie. Nolan's next movie, he is scheduled to direct Troy.
Ooh, the Wolfgang Peterson.
Because Wolfgang Peterson was only going to produce. And Nolan worked on, sounds like he worked on it for like a year. And then Peterson said, on second thought, I think I would like to direct this movie. And so he's out.
Well, the reason we have the Odyssey is because he didn't get a chance to do Troy all the way back then, which he said recently in interviews that was something he was really excited to do. And I'll tell you this, Wolfgang Peterson's film is perfectly fine, but it ain't going to hold a candle to what Nolan is going to do to the Odyssey. I can just guarantee you that right
100%.
now. So yeah. I mean, it's a fine film, no problem. But like it just defaults to way too much of the lower common denominator approach to this story. And so I'm curious to see what the Odyssey is going to be. But, Steve, these things happen for a reason. You lose out on projects for a reason. You lose out on actors for a reason because you're being set up for something else, even if you can't see it.
I mean, it's interesting because Wolfgang Peterson is one of those really interesting directors. But for a lot of directors have the trajectory of Wolfgang Petersen, which is they do unbelievable work at the beginning of their career. And then and then solid work in movies I like and workman-like work, and then movies that nobody really cares about, Like there are not a lot of people like Nolan who continue to ramp up.
Right.
And it sounds like Warner Brothers, which was producing Troy, felt bad for him, and that's why he got the Batman Begins shot.
Wow. I did not know that it was because they might have felt bad for him. Jesus, okay.
One of the things that has occurred to me, and this was mentioned a bunch in some of the stuff I was reading about him, is that there's something very Victorian about Christopher Nolan's look at things. Like he loves science fiction stuff, but there's a Jules Verne, H.G. Wells kind of quality. He's also really drawn to noir detectives and Raymond Chandler in particular, and a lot of the murky world. And he also loves things, again, because this is why I see it as sort of Victorian. He loves science, but he loves very mechanical feeling science some of the time, where you really see the machinery working, in many different ways. And so when he comes on to Batman, which by the way, it's I think 97 is Batman and Robin, and now we're in 2000, I forget what year it is, 2003 or 4. So like that's not a whole lot of time to do before doing a reboot. Actually, today reboots can happen in 2 years later. So at that point, that seemed like you're already going to reboot Batman. That seems kind of weird. And Nolan comes in to pitch WB and basically goes, the way I want to make this work is to really ask the questions of how does this work? Like, what is the reality? And really ground it and focus it on how this works. It sounds like Warner Brothers went, Christopher, that sounds great. We're thrilled about all your ideas. There has to be a Batmobile. And he's like, but the Batmobile's like always the most ridiculous part of, I don't want to do a Batmobile. And they're like, no Batmobile, no movie. And so then he starts to ask the question of, well, if there was really going to be a Batmobile, what would it be? Yeah. If you were realistically needed a vehicle to go fight crime, where would you get it and what would it be? And it sounds to me like the WB forcing them to do the Batmobile and the thought process of trying to figure out how you would do the Batmobile is central to what the whole movie becomes. Like the whole Lucius Fox, all of that stuff of how do I really do this starts with them trying to figure out what a Batmobile would be in this world.
Yeah. Well, and this is what is so great about Nolan that I think, are starting to really understand when looking at his movies, is that he will go to the fantastical and the epic in terms of scope or cinematography, like the city folding in on itself in Inception and what have you. But there has to be a reason for it. I'll give you a Batmobile. What's my reason for the Batmobile? I'll give you a guy wearing the Batman costume. What's the reason for him wearing the Batman costume? It has to intellectually make sense to him, and then he has to ground it. And yes, the comic book elements are still going to be there, but it has to be grounded, right? Insomnia, we just talked about. That's a grounded approach, this idea of what would happen to a regular cop when he accidentally shoots his partner and has to cover for it, as a thriller, as a killer knows what he did and hangs it over his head. It's played out through the whole. It's really great. It's epic. It's cool. But this is something else. And so, yes, I'm going to go into the comic book world, but it has to feel real. It has to feel tangential. I have to feel like it's something that could happen and we could see happening in our world today. And I think that's a very smart way. Again, I use this word over and over again with him, but I think it's a very smart way to walk into the Batman lore and bring it to screen in a way that's very different to what Joe Schumacher did or Tim Burton did.
And this is why, it's funny, we recently did a short on Christopher Nolan and the backlash and people pushing back against things that they heard about the Odyssey and stuff like that, which I always feel is so ridiculous. And this is a perfect example of why, which is that what happened here, Nolan went through an entire thought process to figure out the reasoning behind a specific choice. He didn't share that thought process with us. He just made the choice and we saw it and we went, it's awesome. Now, you could like the armor that we've seen in, from the Odyssey, or you could like whatever the choices he wants, or you could like the casting or whatever. But the thing is he had a thought process and we're not privy to that thought process. That's how people make great films. It's not just I want a Batmobile, because the Batmobile that the studio would design would be a shitty Batmobile.
Right.
You needed someone to go through a whole thought process to get to the great design, and we don't know what those things mean in the Odyssey yet. So it's silly to talk about.
Agreed.
As I said, I wanted to mention some other films that are influential on Christopher Nolan, and one of them this might be his favorite film. Yeah, he didn't say that, but kind of the way that he talked about it made me feel that. And as soon as I heard it, it's like, of course he loves this film. And that is Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's duality. It's we don't know what reality is. It's nonlinear. It's all of these things, exploring, memory, exploring human emotion, obsession. All of those things are in Vertigo.
It's a hero that becomes a villain because of his obsession. And then when the obsession is removed, he comes back to who he was. And so it's a complex protagonist in that movie. Jimmy Stewart is not a good guy in a lot of ways, which is what makes him doing that film very bold. And so to have that be something that influences Nolan makes all the sense in the world, because all of his protagonists are flawed in a lot of ways in their decisions. We understand them as human beings. But I think he endeavors to show you the multiple dimensions that exist within humans, whether they be the antagonists or the protagonists of his movies.
By the way, would you like to know why Jimmy Stewart is a hero that becomes a villain? Because he didn't die the hero. Because that's what happens. You either die the hero or you live long enough to become the villain. So do you remember what your experience was when you first saw Batman Begins?
Yeah, I mean, I just remember that I was so excited because by that point, the Batman, Joel Schumacher, Tim Burton stuff had kind of run its course. And I had gotten older. So I was more into seeing a darker approach to Batman. And look, I know in 89, that was a dark approach to Batman for 89. But by the time this one was coming out, I was really excited. And I was also curious because Nolan was still somewhat of an unknown entity. Yes, you had Memento, which was a smaller film. You had Insomnia, which was a remake, but tried to be a crowd pleaser, so to speak. This one was going to be interesting to see if he was going to be able to bring what he needed to bring to this and add Christian Bale to the mix, who I didn't immediately think was the best Bruce Wayne or Batman choice. And then Katie Holmes, who I guess was coming out of Dawson's Creek. So I had a lot of concerns whether this was going to be right or not. But I was excited. I remember feeling that. And then when I came out of the theater, I was like, this is amazing. This is a great way to go. Liam Neeson, all of this stuff, and Michael Caine, just so good. So I was very happy by the time that movie was over. What about you?
I think, it's funny. I think this is kind of an important conversation because Batman Begins, in a lot of ways, is the beginning of the modern superhero movie era. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because it's before Iron Man. So, we've had, I think, I'm not sure which year the Hulk was, but like.
Same year, just later, I think after Iron Man, I think.
Yeah. So like this is, and it's interesting because, when Tim Burton's Batman came out, that's 1989. I graduated high school in 86. The things that had kept me in comics were Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller and Watchmen.
Yes.
That's what, probably my interests in comics were starting to fade around the time those things came out. And then I was 100% back in. And then just the trailers for Tim Burton's Batman was just like, they're gonna do it. They're gonna do it. They're doing it. They're giving me my Batman. And I remember seeing the midnight showing of Tim Burton's Batman and really feeling that way. Really going yes. Upon reflection and over the years, Tim Burton's Batman has gone downhill a long way for me. And it has started to feel much more cheesy. And then from there, you go into the Schumacher Batmans, and those are just, they're ass. That's my feeling about them. They're terrible, And so I felt at the time like, oh, they're never gonna really do these comic books the way I want them to be done. And then, actually, what I should say, it isn't Batman Begins. It's really the first X-Men movie.
Yeah, 2000.
Yes, and the Spider-Man
chime
movies.
in with that.
Yeah, so those are really important. And those are more like, oh, these are really trying to get to the stuff of the comic book. And then Batman Begins comes. And for me, first of all, the look of it is fantastic. The whole design of it is fantastic. And then that because Nolan really thought about how are we really going to do this? How would this actually happen? And focused a third of the movie on Batman becoming Batman, or half of the movie,
Right.
Like, and what his training was, and going to Ra's al Ghul and all of those things. And really, I felt honoring the comic books in the way that they should be honored and taken very seriously. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because he tried to make it grounded and believable in a system and a society that feels tangible to us as human beings, right? Whereas Burton's was much more comic booky, both of them, and Batman, and they're fun. Both of those films can be fun. And I think I agree with you. The first one is cheesier. Looking back on it now, doesn't hold its strength as well. I think Batman Returns holds up better. But the Schumacher stuff. But you get to and you're like, oh, this feels much more tangible. And this is what the public wanted, right? And the thing is, our tastes change. Directors reflect our taste changes. Sometimes they're like a step ahead or two steps ahead before we get there. But most of the time, they're on the same universal wavelength that we are. I'm a big believer in that kind of stuff. And so he sensed, and we as a collective consciousness sensed, we wanted something different from a Batman. And the studios, to their credit, sensed that they wanted a different Batman as well than what we'd had. So when you watch this movie, you're like, oh, wow, this is all about this dude's struggle. And if you had read, Batman Year One, as we did, and Batman Dark Knight Returns, we are poisoned by that, for lack of a better term, to see our Batman in a certain way.
Yeah.
And when we see that playing out in this film, it satisfies us on so many levels. So because he's someone we can connect to. He's someone we can understand. He's not a rich boy who's just like, doing this for fun. We're seeing the pain and the frustration and the anger, and all of that plays through. And everything that he brings up is tangible. A guy being on a mountain training a group of people to be assassins, that is very believable in our minds. When we stretch a little bit of the disbelief, we could see that being possible in the world he's constructed. And where it all comes down to with Gotham and the water and all that kind of stuff, like it's believable, and that works, I think.
To me, it's so all about having a vision. It's not so much that you have my particular vision. Mm-hmm. Like I wouldn't have done that exact Batman, but it's very clear that, and this is, I think I said this maybe when we did Superman, or maybe when we did Dark Knight years ago, is that in my mind, Superman is not a very flexible character. You can't. He's pretty limited. But Batman is actually a very flexible character. You can have the Tim Burton Batman, and you can have the Batman Begins Batman. I love the Ben Affleck Batman, which is a very, I don't think the movies were good, but I think that particularly, like the mature detective guy. Yeah. I actually think it would be perfect right now to have the Adam West Batman again. I think this is a great time to do that. The Lego Batman is great at making fun of Batman. And you have all sorts of weird in the comics, super dark, gothic, horror. Like Batman can do a lot of stuff. But you got to have a vision, and the vision has to be consistent, and the vision has to respect the fan. I don't think that we need to serve the fan. Like, I don't think Schumacher respected comic book fans. I think he thought this is dumb, stupid fun, and I'm going to make a dumb, stupid movie. And that's not what's, satire in it, fine. But that's why I didn't like those. And in this movie, there is so much, and he really thought through. Like one of the biggest ones to me, as I mentioned in the description of the Batmobile, is the choice of what they did with Lucius Fox, and how Batman gets his stuff. And the casting of Morgan Freeman and all of it, because this is every single player that comes in is great. And that whole world is so joyful of what's the new toy that Batman, it becomes Q, of course, but in a way that works much better than Q often works in the Bond movies.
Well, I think also because Nolan very smartly understands the way I get this character, the audience to cheer for this character, is I have to put people in who are constantly telling him that he can't do this. This is something that's a universal experience, I think, for a lot of people, that we're either told by societal messages or by people we know that we can't do this, that the dream is too hard. Going after the things that you want, it's going to take a lot of effort, and not a lot of people can do it, right? And so you look at this situation. You have Lucius Fox who's constantly questioning him and the things he's doing. Alfred is constantly questioning him and the things he's doing. Katie Holmes' character is constantly questioning the things that he's doing. And at times he's even questioning himself and the things that he's doing. So that makes him a relatable character. And again, grounded, real. We can understand this person on a subconscious and conscious level. We can connect to this guy and the journey that he's going on. And Bale plays him really well as a guy who is trying to find his voice and his strength, but he makes mistakes. He fucks things up. He's too young. He's too immature at times to deal with the things that are happening. And so to see that progression through the movie is a very smart way to play that out. And he mirrors how Gotham changes, right? Because he's very much the city. And I think that's another smart decision he made with the movie as well. And I love what Matt Reeves is doing with this, as you said.
Sure.
Having a vision and a malleable character like Batman, you can put him into any scenario if you've got a creator with vision. And we're seeing that now with the Batman, with Matt Reeves, you know?
I totally agree. And I think what's so smart in Batman Begins, it's very thematically unified, which is there is so much that is about fear. You know, there's so much about him being frightened by the bats as a child. It's his regret and the trauma that he's carrying. He has to deal with his fear and his regret in his training in order to, you know, become one of the League of Shadows. Yeah. And then what it also becomes, because Batman is a revenger, is it becomes, where is the line? What is the moral line? How can you be a protector? And that the Ra's al Ghul character is taking it one step forward. He believes that Batman is weak because he is unwilling to do the things necessary to actually fight for the good. And Batman believes, and all that's set up perfectly. And the fact that fear is so central thematically, of course, you have the Scarecrow as a bad guy. That's a movie that's working all of its pieces together, you know? Right.
And I was just talking to you off camera before we started this recording because I'd just seen Masters of the Universe last night as we're recording this. And I told you the film is a commentary on masculinity, Adam's masculinity, toxic masculinity versus a more empathetic masculinity. And I think this film, Batman Begins, as we're talking about it, occurs to me, that also is an element of this movie because, as you said, Ra's al Ghul, who is much more the macho, masculine, handle things, dominate my people, this kind of thing, he is the standard, typical masculine approach to things. And he's saying to Batman, to Bruce Wayne, you are too weak to be the leader of this. You're too weak to be a hero in this city. But it's Batman's empathy. It's Batman's care. It's Batman's love for Gotham. And yes, you could argue that he's a bit of a vigilante and he can be a bit rough. It's all about, it's coming from a place of love and wanting to protect the weak and the innocent. Whereas Ra's al Ghul sees the weak and the innocent as something to be eradicated from society, which is old school masculinity. This idea you mamby-pamby, give me 20 push-ups, that kind of shit. And so it's fascinating that it's kind of a low-key commentary on masculinity throughout this film as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so many things where it's like the journey of Batman to become Batman, it's Batman Begins, has such great steps that Nolan doesn't fall into the traps of making him too good too early. You know what I mean?
Right.
Is like, and that's because the whole point is, it was funny. I remember an objection I've made to several Marvel movies, and particularly as Captain America, is in my mind, if your body is completely transformed instantly, it's going to take you a few minutes, really a few weeks or even months to figure out what you can do and how to move. But Steve Rogers, the moment that it happens, goes off and chases the bad guys is like a superhero.
Yeah.
And it's great. And the sequence is great. But if I were ever making a superhero movie, it would be hard to learn how to be a superhero. And that's what Batman Begins does really, really well.
That's so central to the Spider-Man stories, isn't it? How does he use his powers, figure out his powers, you're so right. You're so right. Absolutely.
One other thing I want to point out about Batman Begins, this is the first time that Christopher Nolan works with Michael Caine, who he will work with over and over and over again. Obviously an actor he loves.
Yes. He does have his talismans for his movies, for sure.
Well, and having just, listened to this book about him, he said, I often divide directors into the assholes and the not assholes. And from what I can tell, I think Christopher Nolan could be aloof. I think he can be, I think he can have very strong opinions. I think he can make people work really hard. But it seems to me like he's not one of the assholes. He's someone who's interested in the craft, really respects and admires the people. One of the things, one of the last quotes in the book was he was just like, the idea that a director makes the whole movie themselves is not only wrong, but it's a terrible idea because, it's like, what you do is you say a thing, and then your collaborator comes with an idea, and then you're not sure about that, and you wrestle it back and forth, and some other brilliant person contributes something else, and and this is the thing, and again, it's the same thing I'll say over and over again of why the people in the cheap seats bug me, is it's thousands of decisions every day. And what he said was, you never know if it's going to work. You just hope that you have a feeling about doing this way, and then you pursue that feeling. And then in the editing room, you try to make it all work, but you never know. And there's no way to make all these decisions perfectly, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, Tom Holland it came out in an interview. He gave some kind of statement recently, the last couple of days. And he said, working with Christopher Nolan on The Odyssey, I went back and told Destin Daniel Cretton, this is how we have to function on this set. We need to come to the set every day with an idea of what we're doing, with a vision of what we're doing. We're not going to figure it out on the set. And so that's an interesting thing that even someone like who's an actor on another film, who's the lead of another franchise, works one film with Christopher Nolan and is completely affected by it to come back to his franchise and tell the new director coming into his franchise, this is how we're going to do things, because he finds himself artistically inspired and artistically motivated by the experience of working with Nolan. And that Nolan developed into this kind of director from where we're at now with him as we're talking about it,
It first of all shows real clear how Tom Holland's been in a lot of movies.
Yes.
And, and yet he's only just now working with a director that has a plan and a vision and knows what he's doing and organizes a shoot. And this is, when I read that MCU book, and I know I've said it before, it makes sense because the main emotion on a lot of these Marvel sets is chaos, is constant scrambling. And what happens... The reason I respect Christopher Nolan so much is he goes, this is what I'm doing.
Yes.
And he doesn't ask anybody else. And it's like this, and it's either going to work or it's not going to work. Whereas with the MCU movies, every single thing is second guessed. So some executive will come to set all the time and go, oh, but we have to make sure to, feature this character more because we're getting a lot of pressure from fans that love this side character. Or we have to make sure to plant this. We've decided to change the plot of a movie 3 movies down, which means we have to introduce this character's power earlier or whatever it is. And so it doesn't surprise me that that's Tom Holland's experience.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's Nolan knows what he wants. And this is what he's going to do. He's still open to collaboration, but the end result is what he's trying to get to, and he knows where he's trying to get to it when he walks onto the set. And that's a good combo of how to function on the set. Now, it doesn't mean that every great movies that have been made functions like that, because as we know, Steve, we've talked about it on the show, there are quite a few domineering assholes who have made some pretty amazing films. But you'd prefer, I would think, this route more than the other routes, but
Well, and there are a bunch of totally chaotic films that made amazing films.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Jaws and Apocalypse Now. Yeah. So like it's not it is a nicer way to work. I won't disagree with you, but I want to say something slightly differently, which is just that yes, Nolan knows what he wants and he knows what he's trying to do, but he doesn't know the whole picture. He doesn't know all the details in advance. He knows he's going to, like, one of the interesting things he does, particularly in the way he works with Hans Zimmer, is that, so for instance, and we'll get to this in a moment, but I think it was it's for Interstellar. So, we'll go into detail because we're going to do the full breakdown on Interstellar. Here's what for things like Inception, he just had Hans Zimmer make themes and just compose things, and then they played with them and twisted them, and they don't do like a traditional spotting session, which was what you do with the composer. Is you go, okay, at this moment I want it really dissonant, and then I want the downbeat here, and then I want a crescendo here, and I want scary music here. That's not what they do at all. Is that he goes to Zimmer and goes, I'm feeling a bunch of these things, compose a bunch of these things around these feelings, and then he brings them all this music, and then it's really, particularly in Inception, but in Tenet as well, although that's not, I don't think that's Hans Zimmer, he uses sound design and music and folds them all together in the process. And here's what he did on Interstellar. He said, first of all, this is one more interesting point to bring up. Before he makes a movie, before he even starts writing the script, he writes a few pages of, this is what's important about this movie. This is why I'm telling this story. This is the emotions that I'm trying to get to, or the ideas I'm trying to get to. And then he puts that in an envelope and he puts it in a drawer. Yeah. And then he writes. And then if he gets stuck or feels unsure, he pulls it out reads the whole thing. And then he puts it back in the drawer. And then when he's casting and he's not sure of who to cast, he pulls it out and reads the whole thing. And then in production. And so this is this document to say, it's funny because it's something that I've said when teaching, is that sometimes when you're decisive, like you knew what you wanted to do when you started shooting, and then on the set, you're suddenly stressed out and exhausted, and you just, worried, and you don't know what the fuck to do. Well, try to remember what the guy thought who isn't stressed out and exhausted. You're the version of you from the past, and do what he would have done. Because you can't make this decision right now. So I think that's a form of that. So that's this one thing he does. And he did it for Interstellar. And then he decided to do something else, which is he said to Hans Zimmer, listen, I'm going to give you a 1-page short story. And it is about the feeling of, and I want you to read it, and I want you to then start composing themes based on this 1-page short story. And Hans is like, well, is this the short story that the movie's based on? And he's like, no, this is just a short story that has this feeling. And he gives him this short story, and it's something about a father and a son, and the father not being able to see through the perspective of the son and the distance between them, or something like that. And Hans Zimmer found it really moving and calls up, I love the story, but I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. He's like, just write music about what you felt when you read that story. And he only after Zimmer had written multiple themes and given to them, did he tell him what Interstellar is actually about. Wow. So, and this is what I mean. It's like, he's pointing in a direction. He knows the direction I'm trying to go, but he doesn't know how he likes not knowing how he's going to get there on some level, Right.
Yeah, of course. Because that opens it up to artistic discovery and allows for spontaneous, in the moment, organic. That's the word I'm looking for. Organic creativity. Right. And I think he surrounds himself with people that he trusts, just like Eastwood. Surrounds himself with people that he trusts, who's worked with for a long time, and he knows how to speak to them to get them to do what they need to do for the film overall, because these are incredibly talented people that he surrounds himself with. And I think he has to understand, like a great coach or a great manager, he has to understand how to speak to each of them in their language and get them to bring about some great results from their work.
Well, and the cool thing that happens too, and this is one that because people always talk about the genius director, and there are genius directors, of course, but the cool thing that happens is when you challenge Hans Zimmer, or you challenge Christian Bale, or you challenge the screenwriter or the effects person, they often come back and challenge you.
Yes, right, exactly. Yes.
So you get that music from Hans Zimmer, and then it's and that gives you ideas. And then you're like, I have to live up to this. This is making me see things in a different way. You're doing a rehearsal with an actor, and they make an unexpected choice. And you go, I never saw this moment like that. But if it's like that, then I have to totally change the way I'm using the camera. I have to change the costuming. And that's what's so exciting. That's what makes making movies actually fun,
Exactly. And in a lot of ways, when you do that as a director, the creative that you're working with feels even more ownership of the project, because you're taking their ideas and you're following along with them, and you're reconstructing or rejiggering the overall project to fit around this thing you've discovered in organic way. Yeah.
Yeah. So needless to say, Batman Begins is a monster hit. And it's a pretty incredible transformation from, clear indie filmmaker.
Yeah.
Made a studio film that's a quality studio film, then makes a massive superhero blockbuster. But I think Nolan, what's so special about him is there's a big part of him that's still an independent filmmaker, the way he sees the world, the way he thinks,
Yeah, which is why everything is so grounded in these three films. Yeah. And I do want to say one thing. Some people might be like, well, it only made $375 million off a $150 million budget. Back then, this was a massive hit because people weren't going in the numbers that they go to now. You want to compare Matt Reeves making $700-something million off the Batman? Yes, because now we're in the age of superheroes. As Steve said earlier, this was still the beginning of the modern age of superhero films that we were getting. So the crowd wasn't trained yet to go and see these things. The age group hadn't aged up to go and see these things at the level that they go and see them at. So this would have absolutely made $700, $800, $900 million today if it was released.
Well, the big reason is ticket prices. Ticket prices in 2006 were very well. They didn't have the huge, they weren't $20 a
Yeah.
ticket. They were like $14 a ticket. There's a big difference in terms of box office. The next film that we go into, of course, is The Prestige. I was on some vacation somewhere, I think with my mom and my extended family, and we all went to see this movie. And I just remember it just blowing me away. The twist at the end and what you discover still fucking haunts me. It is so disturbing to me. And as I told you, I rewatched it again a couple of days ago. So good. It's so well made.
Well, again, you're bringing Christian Bale in, who you just finished working with. You're bringing in Hugh Jackman, who, to see what he can do to create here as an actor, the X-Men stuff, other things he'd done. But like, you're bringing them in, and then you're bringing in Scarlett Johansson, which is an interesting actress to bring into the mix. And it's fascinating because there are certain actresses he works with and they never seem to come back and do other things. Like Hillary's never come back, and that's always been I think she hasn't come back, and that's always been a shame. But you've got Michael Caine in this one as well, just the talisman that he has. But the story here is fascinating. Yeah. It's so interesting. And I think this is a great thing. He's like, I'm not going to be seen as I'm not going to fall in this rut where now I become a superhero film director, right? Like, I've got to do something else, and I've got to challenge the audience to explore things with me. So I'm going to use two actors who've been in superhero movies, and an actress who's going to be, at the time, I don't think that she had been Black Widow yet. And I'm going to see what I can do with these three actors. And I think what he creates here is a fantastic sleight of hand movie. As you said, with a very powerful ending, and one that stretches the bounds of believability at the end, but you've got to do a really good job leading up to that ending to get people to accept it. It's fascinating.
And if you look at, from a screenwriting perspective, if you look at the bones of this film, it's all there, particularly when you go to watch it the second time. Because the first time, things are just kind of flowing by you. But the second time you watch it, if you're paying attention, you're just like, how many examples of duality are there in this movie? How often do you see things doubled? The fact that the movie starts with him explaining the magic trick. It's explaining the con job. There is the pledge, there is the turn, and there is the prestige. And he demonstrates this is how this works. And if you think about the whole film is following that exact same structure that he told you about. Right at the beginning, we see the magic trick with the bird, and shortly thereafter find out that the secret of the magic trick is every single time they kill a bird. Yeah. It is both doubles and it is killing the bird. It's like, and there's so many things in the movie where you're like, and throughout, and I don't know if we're spoiling it or not spoiling it, it is an old film, but when they're trying to figure out this trick that Christian Bale's character is doing, Michael Caine instantly right away says, has to be a double. Yeah. And that gets rejected. And of course that is, he said, it's like literally the magician says, here's how I'm going to do this trick. And then proceeds to do the trick exactly how they said they were going to do it, and blows you away at the end. Yeah. That's what's so impressive to me about The Prestige. Yeah, that little ball gives away everything. But again, as you said, him going back to he's an independent movie director. This is only made for $40 million. Okay, $40 million after not quite my independent film level, but yes,
in comparison. Yeah. And so you go like, wow, only 40, and he wanted to go back and do something like this, be in control, touch base with his roots again, and it's really smart. And I can't help but think, I don't know the history of the idea of this yet because we haven't done the breakdown on this movie, but like he just did a film about duality with a Batman and a Bruce Wayne, right? A Scarecrow and the Doctor. So there's those things. Ra's al Ghul, even the duality of him, and the sleight of hand, even the illusion of, hey, it's not it's not Ken Watanabe, it's actually Liam Neeson, who's Ra's al Ghul. So there is a lot of that, and I think that's an element of what he was exploring here. Maybe there was an idea that popped up in writing the Batman that he wanted to pursue a little further with The Prestige, and I think he just does an excellent job with this. And to get people to come see a period piece like this in Victorian London to explore this stuff and challenge the audience intellectually again, it just speaks volumes to how much confidence he's building within himself to tell these kinds of stories, and that trusting that the audience will go along with him when he does these stories. I think it's great.
Several things. The first one, I said it earlier, but I'm putting my finger, I think, on explaining what my thought is a little bit better, because you mentioned the Victorian era, and I think and that's this thing that kept drawing. There's something Victorian about Christopher Nolan. I kept feeling that, but what it actually is it's actually the Victorian world where there are clearly defined morals and ethics and behaviors that people are supposed to have. Yeah. Moving into a modern world where those things no longer apply. And so that is it. Like, so in Batman Begins, it's the Ra's al Ghul is like, no, there is no order here anymore. Therefore, we have to destroy everything. And Batman is trying to hold on to some kind of order. Here we have the new world coming in of electricity and science and the combat between those things and what is the level of morality, again, that's okay. For instance, Christian Bale's character is doing something absolutely horrible. I mean, so by the way, if we ever did do The Prestige and Memento too, both of these movies would be so fun to do, because what we do on the Cine-Files is try to go, well, what actually is going on? Like, it's not just telling the movie, but it's like actually going like, well, what happened to Guy Pearce's character? How do all these pieces fit together? And really trying to figure it out. And will say that I will spoil this part because I have to, in order to explain this, but, Christian Bale's character is actually a twin who is hiding the fact that he is a twin from the entire world, including his wife and the woman that... So he's not actually having an affair. It's that the twin is in love with Scarlett Johansson and the other guy is in love with the wife, but the wife doesn't know this. I mean, this is a horrible thing that he is doing to the people he loves in order to have this magic trick. That's what he's willing to sacrifice. Right. And what Hugh Jackman is willing to sacrifice is literally his life over and over and over again. And so again, it's this idea of, what are you willing to do? What are the lines of morality and duality? It's not that it comes up over and over and over again in his movies. Al Pacino and Robin Williams, there is a duality there. They are both, and this is there was the thing that Nolan said in the book was he said, like, I worry, am I repeating myself? Like, there are a lot of directors who just keep making the same movie over and over again. Nolan is 100% not repeating himself. No. But he is fascinated by certain themes and ideas that he explores in all these different ways.
Yeah, I agree. And you can look at this from a symbolism point of view, this movie, right? What are you willing to sacrifice for success?
Yep.
As a guy like him, right? Oh, I've got a wife, but there's Christopher Nolan, the human being, is not Christopher Nolan, the director. Christopher Nolan, the director, has a different situation, has a different set of requirements, things he has to do. Then you can look at it, well, what kind of director do you want to be? Do you want to be a director who's constantly killing the director he was before so you can create something new or keep going? So there's a lot you could dive into and explore here with how he approaches this thing as a commentary on anyone who achieves success. People who achieve success, a lot of them are sacrificing their wives or sacrificing their families because they're this completely different person, and that's what they're driven by, right? And they don't even let in their family to see their daily lives of what they do to succeed. So there's an element of that. And there's other people who are willing to kill the version of themselves that they were to achieve this next level of success.
Totally.
And to go to the next level, they'll kill that version of themselves to get to the next level, right? We see this all the time now in a very small ways with influencers. The person you start out knowing changes the second they become an influencer because they're influenced by the things they have to do in order to stay at that level. The more as they achieve more success, then that version of their influencer has to die and they have to go to another. But they're making bargains with themselves at every level. And they're sacrificing more and more of who they are at every level. And it's a fascinating thing to look at, all to achieve success. And does it all really matter? Which I think at the end is interesting to think about in The Prestige. Did it all really matter for both of those people to do the things that they did? Because they both lost.
Yeah, exactly. Two things. Another theme that goes along in a lot of Nolan movies is obsession.
Yes.
Obsession. Yes. It's whether it's Inception, obviously it's Batman. There's so many places
Insomnia.
Of Insomnia. Yeah. That's another thing. And I just had a thought, which is, what I wish people would do? Anyone who goes, I want great success. I want political power. I want to become a giant YouTuber, an influencer, a film director, a multi-billionaire in the tech industry, whatever. They have to do what Christopher Nolan does and write what their intentions are before they start and say, if I ever get $1 billion, I'm going to give away 10% of my net worth every year until I'm down to $500 million. Or I am never, ever going to sell myself and my morality out to a horrible country that tortures people. Or just like, this is my plan. I know it's not legally binding, but it should be legally have to be made public if you become what you want to become. So you know what I mean?
What Steve is saying is everyone should have a declaration of principles, like Charles Foster Kane at the beginning.
Exactly, 100% right. And people should be able to wave that fucking declaration of principles in your face if you become extremely powerful and break them.
Yeah. Or tear it up into little pieces and send it to you in a letter. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm listening to this book. By the way, it's really good. If you're a Christopher Nolan fan, I highly recommend it. It's called The Nolan Variations. It's by Tom Schoen. The audiobook is pretty good. And there are many, many times where Christopher Nolan is sort of teasing this author who's interviewing him with intellectual mind games, the things that Nolan is clearly fascinated about. And one of them is maps. He, and I totally get this, hates Google Maps and things like that, because there are all these people who just hand over their willpower to the GPS. And what happens is you don't build a mental map of the world. Is that when you had to go out and you didn't have GPS to depend upon, you kind of had to learn which street to go on. And so he challenged this writer to go out without their phones into this area where there really wasn't a sense of direction and try to find their way around and see what it felt like. And the reason I bring this up is that one of the things that a director has to have in their head is the map of the film, is that they have to have a sense of the thing as a whole. And I'm sure you've done this where you came in to act in a movie and you needed to say to the director, okay, wait, where are we? And what did this happen? You know, like it's not always easy for one person coming in for a job for a day to know, wait, does this scene happen before that scene or after that scene? And, you know, what do I know about this thing? Well, the director has to keep that map in their head. They have to understand to some degree what the whole thing is. All of Nolan's movies are exceptionally complicated maps. They are so, you think about Memento and Tenet and Inception, but also The Prestige, also The Dark Knight, like also Dunkirk. Like they're so complicated in terms of keeping a mental map in your head, you know, and it makes it, to me, it really connects to why Christopher Nolan does not have a modern cell phone. Is that he wants to build it's building maps in your head is a practice and a skill, and it takes effort over time to do it. And I think Christopher Nolan's map building head, his ability to keep all of these complicated things straight is part of his superpowers.
Yeah, what you said is like earlier about the people from the cheap seats. I saw his comment about this on the interview he did. I think it was with Time or the Rolling Stone recently, and people were like, "Well, what about his assistant? His assistant has a cell phone. Ask his assistant about the emails." People, this is the way it works. Okay, he should be allowed to create as he sees fit, and when he says he doesn't have a cell phone, we should admire that. Yeah, not look to try to denigrate him by scoffing at him and saying like, well, your assistant has a cell phone. That's how you can keep tracks. And it's like, these are the kinds of things that people do who have no fucking concept of what it's like to get to that level, of what it takes to achieve that level, and how much you have to preserve the purity of how you work in order to stay at that level and be authentic in the work you're creating. And so I just always am fascinated by people who want to denigrate other people for not being like them, exactly like them. You know, it's crazy.
To me, yeah, I mean,
especially artists. You know?
Yeah, totally. And of course, Christopher Nolan makes giant movies. Of course, he has worked out systems in order for him to do this without having an iPhone. Yes, of course he has done that. But like, what's so crazy to me is like, I doubt I've gone a day without hearing some podcast, reading a news story or something like that about how our phones are killing us in all sorts of ways. And so this to me is like, I mean, you know, destroying our children's lives, messing with our brains, making us more polarized, all that stuff. So this to me is literally like a smoker when everyone's smoking and going, what's wrong with that guy who's not the one guy not smoking? It's like, no, he's the guy who figured it out. We should admire that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would like to take you to a little film I call The Dark Knight, John.
Hey-o. Yes, let's go.
2008. Of course, we did do this one on the show, and we will be re-releasing it sometime in the next few weeks. You'll get to revisit our Dark Knight conversation. What's funny, it's one of our earlier two-parters. We hadn't done a lot of two-parters when we did Dark Knight, and I am certain if we were doing it again, it would be 3 parts.
Yeah, probably. We even had a guest, my friend Jason Inman, and I remember us recording it at Collider. We did it, a couple of times. So it's an old one. Might be worth a revisit down the road next year. We'll see. But
do you remember how you first saw it?
Oh yeah, with the crew, everybody with the crew going to see it. Of course, probably opening night. That was back when we were knee deep into going opening night with a large group of people. I just remember being like utterly blown away by this movie. It's still one of my favorite films. Everything about it, outside of Aaron Eckhart, works really well for me, and it's still one I go back to. And I always am mystified by the people who say, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody. I'm just mystified by the people who say it's not a Batman movie. But I think that's one of the reasons why it endures and why it's considered one of the great superhero films ever, because it is not necessarily a standard Batman movie. There are there are boxes that are checked to make it a Batman movie, with the Joker and him struggling with his whether he should be Batman or Bruce Wayne, Two-Faces in this thing, all of that. But it's about so much more, this film, that I think that's why some comic book purists get mad at the movie or get upset with the movie being considered a Batman movie. But it is in a lot of ways, because as you said earlier, Steve, it is a director with a vision who takes a character like Batman and makes it and is a malleable character like Batman and makes it fit the world that he's created and building upon from the Batman Begins.
Comments like that again, I'm always like, well, okay, what's the point? Like, the only question to me is, was it a good movie? Right. I mean, like, did you like the film? And like, what if you didn't? If you're saying, man, I love Batman so much, I really wish I could have seen more Batman. I find that to be a perfectly fine criticism. Saying the problem with the movie is that it's not a Batman movie is not, to me, a valid criticism. I know they're kind of close to each other, but like that's making a different statement. First of all, my memory of us going to see that, it was at Sherman Oaks at the ArcLight there, and it was a midnight showing on the Thursday night. And I remember going to the place where you're really tired, like, and want to sleep, and then the adrenaline of the movie hits, and you go into that hyper thing. And I remember walking out of that movie the first time, and all of us were just electrified by it. Yeah. I mean, it was, and now I'm going to say something that everyone will hate me for, which is, it's gotten less good to me over the years. And that doesn't mean, like, for instance, we had the conversation about what is the greatest superhero film, and Dark Knight for a long time was the number one. It is not my number one anymore. It's still great. I still love it. And I kind of feel about it. I feel, first of all, Heath Ledger's performance it's one of the greatest things ever put on screen ever. And every moment he's on the screen, the movie is absolutely amazing. And I think, completely. Electric is exactly the right word. And I feel like if you let the rest of the movie wash over you with its sound and its spectacle and everything, it's totally great. But if you think too much and go like, wait, why are we in Hong Kong? And what's this going on with Two-Face? It's all of the other connective things just they don't quite deliver. I just watched it again a couple of weeks ago. They just deliver at a slightly lower level to me. It's still a great movie. I absolutely, it's not, I'm not trying to criticize it. What's strange about it is how incredibly impactful it is, even though there are all sorts of little things that it's kind of, wait, what? Huh?
I mean, I haven't seen it in a bit. I think it could be a fun conversation to have maybe down the road if we want to do an hour long and make it available for a certain tier, or what we can have a conversation about The Dark Knight. That could be a lot of fun because I haven't seen it in a bit. I still have very positive memories about it, but I've always had an issue with the Two-Face storyline. Yeah. And when I read that Nolan shoved it in because he wasn't sure he was going to do a third Batman movie, that makes all the sense in the world because it feels shoved in. It doesn't feel organic or natural in the course and the pacing of the movie like all the other storylines and all the other characters do in what he did. Even the recasting of Katie Holmes with Maggie Gyllenhaal works because of what Maggie brings to the role as a fantastic actress. So, yeah, I mean, that's the only issues I have with it. But I like the conversations it has about monitoring our communications, the conversation it has about encountering an evil that just wants to be evil and is driven to be evil. How do you react to that? And the questions it asks about us at the end with the fairy scene, the two fairies scene, about do we really, especially now at a time when we're so divided, I wonder how many people would save the other fairy if they didn't, and instead of saving themselves. I really wonder now that question as we're so divided as a world, you know?
So first of all, I actually think doing a Dark Knight, we should totally have the conversation, and let's do it as a short that's going to turn into a medium or a long,
right?
And put it out for free as part of our season of Christopher Nolan. I think, I think we should totally do that. Sure. We should do it. In fact, we could release it when we release the Dark Knight, the re-release of the Dark Knight that we recorded with Jason. So I'm all excited about this idea. Again, but the sequence with the fairies is so great. And it is, again, we're back with duality. We're back with, in Batman Begins, the exploration is how far were you willing to go for justice? And Batman not willing to go or to destroy evil. The Joker doesn't care about destroying evil. What the Joker cares about is destroying the veneer of morality that we walk around pretending that we live by when he believes that none of us do. And so it's asking a fundamentally different question. And I think, and as a scarier question, you know, like, are we moral at all? Is there, or are we only self-interested? Are we all fakes? Is this all a facade? You know?
Yeah. It's the hopeful versus the cynical. Right. And that's coursing throughout the whole movie, because even Batman, even Bruce is cynical at times in dealing with Maggie Gyllenhaal's character and with Dent, because he suspects Dent. Right. He's got questions about Dent. Right. But Maggie is the hopeful one. And then what that leads to is what shatters him and rocks him. And he's got to understand that he has to now take on that hopefulness in honor of her, but also to make him a better person. Right, he's developing, he's changing, he's evolving from the first movie to now throughout this movie as well, which is why at the end I love that line of like, you see yourself long enough to be a villain, and he says, you'll never have to say thank you, you know, that kind of stuff, and it's because he cares, right? I know it's a cheesy line at times, but he does.
No, I was laughing. It's like, well, why? Let me finish. Why aren't they casting John to do voiceover for Batman? That's why I was laughing.
Now you sound like my Lady Outlaw. But like the thing is that I know people have made fun of that line, and I guess I'm trying to say, because you laughed at it, I was wondering if you would make fun of it, but like I know other people have, which is why I defend the line, because I think the line is believable, and you can mock it, of course, you're right to mock it, but I think what he says there is kind of encapsulating the whole movie, is that he loves Gotham now, cares about Gotham, and he knows he has to be a symbol of hope, which is what happens at the end of the Batman. He has to be a symbol of hope, right? When Robert Pattinson is helping people out of the water, it's him pushing away the cynical nature of his Bruce Wayne and the trauma he's experienced, and embracing that to be the hero, he has to care for the people he is protecting, and he has to learn that. Right. And I think by the end of The Dark Knight, Batman or Bruce Wayne really learns it as the Batman. You know?
Yeah, I think they're definitely advancing this character. And if we are going to do a short, I'm going to say we stop talking about Dark Knight now.
Sure.
Although I will say one other thing that's important, which is that this is the first time that Christopher Nolan started to shoot with IMAX cameras. And boy, he likes those IMAX cameras. And this is also the first time, which we just saw for the Odyssey, where he took a sequence in IMAX and released it as a preview before other movies, because we saw the Joker robbery, or part of it, as part of an IMAX preview before the movie came out.
Yeah.
This brings us to 2010 and Inception, another film that we did earlier on the Cine-Files. So we'll be re-releasing that as well. And boy, if we're talking about about time, about duality, about obsession, about mechanical, complicated maps, about layers of unreality and unreliable narrators, boy, Inception has the whole lot.
Yeah. What I think is great, too, is as we go through his movies, you're watching his vision expand. You're watching his approach to movie making become more confident, become much more of a machine in what he's doing. And he's figuring out how to capture the attention of the pop culture mainstream. Because I have to say, he is one of these rare filmmakers that challenges the audience to level up, and the audience takes on that challenge.
Yeah.
He's an incredible mix of Kubrick and Spielberg. To me, I see him as a mixture of both, right?
Great point.
Right? Because he knows how to appeal. He has that magic formula for whatever reason. He knows how to appeal to a majority of the public with his movies, yet he doesn't dumb them down to make them palatable for the pop culture mainstream.
Yeah.
And the pop culture mainstream is excited to be challenged by him, which is why his movies do so well. When people go to see them, they're like, okay, what's the mystery here? What's he showing me about humanity? What's he telling me about the world? And he has engendered so much goodwill with the movie-going audience that they're excited. He has eventized filmmaking over the last few years. And I think when you get to this movie, it is the beginning of him going like, I'm swaggering now. I'm in my prime now after Dark Knight. And Inception is full-on swagger. And I love it. Intellectual swagger. And it's amazing.
I think your Spielberg-Kubrick combination is so spot on because Kubrick could not make a thrilling, action movie,
right?
That made us all feel good and want, and Spielberg couldn't make AI. You know what I mean?
Right.
He couldn't make a Kubrick movie, but Nolan manages to give us super challenging, super artsy fartsy. I mean, right. Inception. When we did 2001. I said that the thing about it was the most of an experimental art film of any movie we had done on the Cine-Files up to that point. Yeah. Well, Inception is total. Memento's obviously experimental. This is totally experimental. It's an idea he had, I think, 15 years earlier, and it took over a decade for him to figure out how to write it, and mostly because, of course, he's been obsessed with dreams and layers of reality, and he sees dreaming. And I'm sure we said this when we did the film. Is that he seems dreaming as part of what the creative process is like that all of film is a dream, it is we are creating. And what's so interesting when you're in a dream, your dream obeys whatever rules it wants, And so you're in one location and doing one thing, and then you're somewhere else, and then you're somewhere else. And so do Christopher Nolan movies, Christopher Nolan movie is going to take you where you want to take. He kind of throws out the rule book. And it's interesting that what made him able to figure out how to make this movie about dreams was he actually had to find the plot, because the plot is, it's a heist movie. And once he had that heist movie structure, well, you got to put the team together for the heist. You got to figure how you're going to manipulate all the people for the heist. You have to, and then it was just translating all of those basic heist ideas into the dream world,
Well, I think that's what is what's incredible about his intellect and the challenge of it. I'm going to make a heist film, but I'm going to make the heist film that goes multiple levels. This isn't an Ocean's 11 movie. This is absolutely a movie where you're going into the psychological consciousness of people and going deeper and deeper into that. And I have to think that the human condition is something that he is fascinated by all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think his characters absolutely reflect that. And I think his desire to explore humanity. Because don't get it twisted. When you're watching The Dark Knight, he is presenting the Joker in a way that makes sense to it. We can understand what he's trying to do. And most of us have had that thought. How authentic is this belief that we're good? How authentic is this belief that we're not, that we don't serve our own self-interest? I think even now, even more so, it's an incredible question to ask when we have become the me generation in 2026 with on steroids. And it's absolutely that. Influencers are an incredible reflection of it. It's very much me, me, me. And we see the new generations very much me, me, me. Like they talk about themselves and they glorify the things that they accomplish all the time on their social media. The younger generations, our generation is ashamed of that, doing that. But the new younger generation have no issue with that. It's fascinating, the change. And so I think this is what you look at when you're watching how he explores the human condition. And so looking at that here again in Inception, going further, going levels deep into a dream in order to create that heist and move it all around, but still dealing with father-son issues, still dealing with trying to prove yourself, still dealing with the trauma of a lost wife and child, and all the things and the pain and the anger and the frustration. And I wonder to me a lot, I know I'm going on for a bit, I apologize, but I wonder to me what his feelings are about his relationship with his wife, because they have a professional relationship.
Yeah.
But a lot of his characters are very conflicted in their relationships with the women in their lives, the things that happen. And I wonder if there's a sense of guilt that he feels because he's so driven to do this. And Emma has come on to be his producer, and she loves him. And you can tell when they talk, they very much love each other. But is there a feeling like she has chosen to go on this path with him in a way and risked what she would have been able to do in her own life? Does he feel a semblance of guilt? And is that playing out with some of the characters that he creates in his films? Because they rarely have successful marriages. They rarely have happy relationships. And so I just wonder about that a little bit, you know?
So I can tell you a little bit because he does talk about this a bit in the book that I listened to, which is and it was, I think it was on Inception. They had kids, or maybe it was Interstellar, but like he was starting to feel guilty about the time away. He definitely was. And then I think he does like what Coppola used to do, which is his family comes with him to the set. And but the other thing is he does think about that. But mostly if you look at all these movies, these are all work obsessed people in one way or another.
Yes.
The work is the most important thing to them. And it's funny because I found this story fascinating, which is Leonardo DiCaprio comes on to do Inception, and it sounds like if you work with Leo, you're going to work with Leo. Like Leo he expects to collaborate, which is why Scorsese loves to work with him. And there are some directors who maybe don't want to have an actor that comes in, but he says that Leo was in the room with him when he was writing. Leo never typed a word, but he was there a lot. And what Leonardo DiCaprio, and I'm assuming we talked about this, it was so long ago, I don't really remember, but I'm assuming we talked about this when we did Inception, but like what Leonardo kept pushing for is this guy needs more emotion. He needs to be struggling with someone. It's the whole story, the whole guilt story, and all the regret and all that stuff comes from Leo. And what's so interesting is that it just shocks me to hear this, but this scared the shit out of Christopher Nolan. And this is why. So Nolan, the thing that cracked the spine of Inception was him going like, oh, it's a heist movie, and understanding what is the structure of a heist movie, and then taking that structure and bringing him into this completely fantastical world.
Right.
What he said is, well, heist movies don't have a strong emotional core. You don't cry in Ocean's 11. You're not like, the point of watching The Sting, yes, there are emotional things in it, but the Sting is about the Sting. And so he was like, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know that you can combine a heist movie and making it emotional. And then I swear to God, he says this in the book where he says something like, I mean, that would mean this is breaking new ground. And I'm like, you're doing Inception. You think this is the thing that scared him, but this is the thing that scared him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're going to go with a story that's levels deep, right, and how they explore the human condition and through the dreams and stuff, you've got to have your characters be just as deep so that we invest in where they're going. I think that's what makes Inception such an exceptional film, is the emotion of DiCaprio's character and ways he's navigating. I think lesser so the Cillian Murphy father-son issues, because we don't spend a lot of time with Cillian, but I think very much those are connectable things, but it's DiCaprio's story that we really are following. And that's the scene with him and, oh God, what's her name again? Marianne Cotillard.
Yeah.
That scene when they're sitting on the fucking windowsills, fuck off, man. I cry every time at that scene. Obviously, because I almost took my life in 2016. So I know that pain. I know that moment. I know what she's going through. And so, but I also feel his desperation to try to save her, to bring her back from the precipice. But she's already made up her mind. And the irony is, the thing that he loves the most about her, which is her strong mind, is the thing that he cannot steer her away from when she decides to make the decision that she makes. So it is, even now I'm getting emotional thinking about it, because it is such a well-written and composed scene. And I think the reason the movie is so elevated is because of moments like that and the emotion. So DiCaprio was 100% right. And I like that it scared Nolan, because an artist should get scared. A creative should be scared to try something new and push the boundaries, because that's where you get great art. You know?
Here's another theme that I think comes up a lot in Nolan, which is inevitability and destiny. Like, I mean, Memento, obviously, because you start at the end and you go backwards, you know. But like that, the way the wheels within wheels lead to that suicide.
Right.
If it is in fact real, or like, because
Right.
who knows?
Great point.
Who knows what the hell is real? But
Great point.
the feeling of inevitable tragedy that is heading in that direction as you wind into it in Inception is just so powerful. And of course, Tenet obviously has inevitability as it travels through time. Interstellar, just like because Memento starts at the end with and with the Polaroid, which is an amazing way to start that film as you realize what's going on. Well, Interstellar starts at the end, because there's the ghost in the, I haven't watched it in a while, but there's the ghost that we later find out is Matthew McConaughey. Like the idea of destiny is something that plays out over and over and over again, literally, in Christopher Nolan movies.
Even the Batman movies. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And then finishing off Inception, he's going to return to the world of Gotham, which, as we talked about when we talked about Dark Knight, there was some sense that he was rushing, so he didn't have to do a third one. And now he ends up doing a third one to, in my opinion, very, very, very mixed results.
Yeah, I would say so as well. I mean, I think there's a lot to enjoy in what Tom Hardy did with that character, but I also think that there's a lot to have questions about. I think the story's not as strong as the first and second films. Yeah. And you can tell that he's a director. And this is the thing. When you deal with the great ones, their greatness is so magnified that when the greatness dips a little bit, it's so obvious. As opposed to someone who delivers good to kind of good work or pretty good work, the dip isn't as significant or notable. But when it's a big person who satisfies you on every levels and you think he's one of the legends of filmmaking, a drop in any way, shape, or form is noticeable. And you can tell that. I think the Joseph Gordon-Levitt storyline doesn't work at all. It felt like they were they had no intention to make a third one. They were trying to fabricate a third story within that was still connected to what they were trying to do. There's still some great scenes, some great action sequences, some interesting stuff, but the Marion Cotillard stuff doesn't work. The Joseph Gordon-Levitt stuff is kind of weak. And in the end, what we get with the final few minutes of the movie, you're just like, okay, I guess this is okay, but it's still a watchable film. I just don't, obviously, as you said, it doesn't compare to the other two, the first two.
What's interesting is all the stuff is still there. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Like there's shot after shot and sound after sound and moment after moment where you're just like, fuck, that's cool. Wow, that's really cool. It looks amazing. I mean, I remember when the trailer came out and there's the football stadium sequence and you're just looking at it going, oh my God. And it's, because we just got out of Inception where we had the rotating hallways and all that stuff. And it's like, Nolan's doing it again. And he is doing it again on many levels in the sense that the same technical genius, the same visionary is making this movie. It's just about less. And it's like, we were talking about, like, my response to Dark Knight, as I've watched it many, many times, is that the things that are great are still great, as I said, but like some of the cracks appear. Well, in Dark Knight Rises, we've removed Heath Ledger, so now we no longer have the thing that was making everything electric. The comment, which I don't agree with, that you brought up of it's not a Batman movie.
Yeah.
That I don't like that comment, but I think they didn't really figure out there is a Batman story. It makes sense. It's structurally there, but I'm not that emotionally involved. And this is, and I'll say one other thing too, because I agree with you, is that when you have the great filmmakers, they're going to take some swings, and when it doesn't quite make it there, then it feels extremely disappointing. But to me, I would contrast this. Dark Knight Rises and Tenet, to me, are very, very different things, because Tenet is, he swings for the fences. It is like, I'm going to do something well beyond Memento in terms of structure of filmmaking that nobody has ever done. And for me, he misses, but he misses swinging for the fences. And whereas this one is like, I'm trying to recapture the magic and give everybody but maybe his heart's not in it as much. Maybe
that's what it is.
You know what I mean?
I think that's what it is. That is, you can tell that his heart is not in it as much as in the other films. So there's not that extra level of care. It matters. When you watch the great ones, you can tell in any arena, sports, Steve Jobs, you can tell when their hearts are fully in it, and when they're a little not sure or not quite there, because it shows in those little extra things that make them great. Those things are not there. And I think that applies here on so many levels. Even the Batman story isn't that strong in this movie as it was in the first two movies. And I do take exception with people saying The Dark Knight isn't a Batman movie. It absolutely is for a lot of reasons. This Dark Knight Rises feels like just kind of like, what? Ra's al Ghul, like I just, okay, sure. You know, it's not quite as magical as those first two.
Well,
and I'd love to know, because you know me, I'm more I'm more cynical about what creatives actually say in interviews being the truth. I'm always cynical about that because I think they're brand saving a majority of the time, in my opinion, and they're not really telling you the full truth. And I would love to like get Chris Nolan super drunk and sit down with him and go, tell me the fucking truth. Why did you go back to this? Because it was almost like a step down with the end result from Inception. Yeah. And so why did you do this? What was driving you to do this? Did you really feel you needed to clean this up, or was the studio begging you and promising you things? Like, I'd love to know, you know?
I think it's a great question. I think hanging out and getting drunk with Christopher Nolan would be awesome anyway. Although I bet the dude would fuck with your head a lot, because having read this book, there's a lot of fucking, I have another one I'm going to tell you from this book about messing with your head. That's definitely going to happen. But my gut is exactly where you're leading, which is that he said, I want to do Dunkirk. This is what I'm passionate about. Yeah. Or Tenet. I don't remember if Dunkirk is WB. Maybe they're not. But
yeah, everything up until Oppenheimer is the same.
Okay.
Studio.
Well, they said, well, maybe we'll let you do your World War II big budget World War II movie, but you got to do another Batman for us.
Right.
You know, that seems perfectly rational. And I'll now bring out what I believe that Christopher Nolan is a technical master. I mean, in terms of how he uses the medium of film, how he uses sound, how he uses music, how he uses special. I mean, the guy knows what he's doing. But I will now bring up my one quibble with him, and it really, really starts in Dark Knight Rises when people said, we can't understand what the fuck Bane is saying. Yeah. And that became a huge thing.
Oh, yeah.
Before the movie came out. And ever since then, in Dunkirk, in Tenet, not so much in Oppenheimer, there are definitely complaints of people saying, I can't understand what people are saying. And and I can remember this in my sound classes in film school. So as you're editing a film, what you're doing is you're watching every scene over and over and over again, which means they're going to get more boring. You can't help it. And because they're getting more boring, you're going to slowly inch up the music. You're going to inch up the effects. You're going to bring up ambiences, because those are bringing some energy to the scene, so that the mix becomes the dialogue, which is almost always on top, is getting closer and closer to that field of sound. Yeah. And what my sound instructor, David Bondalevich, who was one of the great teachers I ever had, said, the problem is you've pretty much memorized the scene.
Yeah.
And because you've memorized the whole thing, your ears are no longer a good judge on whether or not it's understandable. This is not what's happening is you already know all the lines. You hear them perfectly. And so you go like, no, there's no sound problem. All of this is completely intelligible. But for the people who haven't heard the movie before, they're not going to understand it as clearly because they haven't memorized the movie. They haven't watched it 97 times like you have when you're doing the editing, you're doing the sound. And so what David said was, always, when you think you've got the mix just right, bring all that stuff down. If people really need to hear the dialogue, you bring everything else down. And I think Nolan, this is the one thing where he wants that sound field right at the level of intelligibility for the audience. And that means that particularly for people whose ears aren't so great, or if you're in a theater that sound isn't so great, or on a TV that has really shitty sound, which because you didn't have the money to buy the fancy sound bar or whatever, you're going to have trouble hearing this sound, hearing the dialogue. And so this is the one area where I go, Nolan, just listen to David Bondalevich, just pull it back just a little bit, and we'll all be able to understand what everyone's saying.
You're so right, Steve. This is where you start to hear issues with the sound. He did the same thing. Oh, look, with Tenet is really the big one where people are like the entire movie, as opposed to Tom Hardy's voice in Dark Knight Rises. And even now with the trailers that have come out for the Odyssey, people have started already the drumbeat of like, I could barely understand John Bernthal here or Matt Damon here. And then also they comment on the darkness of the movie, because that starts to be an issue over these next few years as well, is how he enjoys darkness. Like you can barely see what's happening. And so it's an interesting situation when you see someone like this who is just tinkering with his greatness. It's like Tiger Woods. Your swing was fine. Why did you go and tinker with your swing for 2 years? The great ones are obsessive. Lucas, the original trilogy was fine. Why are you going? It was great. Why are you going back and adding new shit and changing shit? The great ones tinker, man. They always tinker. It's never quite right, no matter how much they mess with it. And at times they mess with it more. Apocalypse Now. Why do we have the French plantation scene? Why is that endured in every new version of this film that you've done, every new cut? It's like, why? So it's just fascinating how the great ones kind of look at their stuff, ways that we don't.
I agree. I totally agree. And now, and I we don't need to go into it into detail, but the reason that we have the Snyderverse is that he saw Watchmen and 300, and as he's talking to Warner Brothers about Superman and the rest of the characters, he goes, Zack Snyder is the guy that should do it, and he's the one who is the producer on those films,
A lot of his approach there, I think, is very similar to the Batman, the origin of Superman. It's that Snyder, just like Nolan in a different way, wanted to go way out there with his story of the heroes. And I know we disagree on this, but I would have loved to have seen Snyder finish the 5-film arc that he had, and then we could have properly assessed it and seen where we were by the end of it. But when you're dealing with this much money, it's very difficult to finish if people aren't coming to see the movie in large numbers like they should. So I understand what happened, but I also think Nolan dropping off as the main EP was an issue as well. This is kind of a mistake because Snyder is just as alpha as Nolan is, and I don't think their tastes quite lined up in the same way in terms of epicness, and that affected the end result, so to speak.
And by the way, I don't actually disagree with you. To me, there's like two different questions. One question is, was Warner Brothers right to abandon it? And my answer is probably yes. Mm-hmm. But as a curious person and a person who likes movies, I absolutely wanted to see where he was going.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't like that. And of course we can't, and that's why I don't want to go too much into the Snyderverse, but it's like, I don't know. I know that the director's cut of Batman v Superman is better than the other one. I still don't quite love it. The Justice League, Zack Snyder's version, is definitely better, but I don't really love it. And the whole time I'm going, well, where are we going with this? So of course I would have wanted to see what would have happened.
Yeah.
His next film, 2014, we're not going to talk about too much because we're going to talk about it a ton. And that is Interstellar, which I will just say I am now an hour and 20 minutes into going very, very slowly through it.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, pretty good movie.
Yeah. This is probably my favorite movie of his, this side of Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I won't say The Dark Knight because I think The Dark Knight belongs in the pantheon of comic book movies, and it's different. Like, it's just different. Whereas these are the Nolan originals. And of course, Oppenheimer is based on the book, but like these are the Nolan approaches that are outside the comic book world. And so for me, I kind of assess his films differently from outside the comic book world versus the Batman stuff. And so for me, this is probably my favorite next to Oppenheimer of his films because I think it's like Mozart. To me, Interstellar is like a Mozart composition. It is so genius. And a lot of people didn't get it when it came out. And so many of those people have changed their minds as they've gotten older and watched it again. There is so much genius coursing through Interstellar that I can't wait for us to talk about it. But I know we're not going to get too deep into it now. But like, this is a magnum opus for me of Nolan.
Well, now you got me even more excited to talk about it. Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing that he starts doing around this time is kind of two projects, which strangely enough, one is looking forward in time and one is looking back in time, which he becomes both very involved in film preservation, making sure that old movies are really taken care of and can be presented in the best possible way, while simultaneously, he really felt a responsibility to find young new filmmakers or filmmakers from different countries who haven't been seen and get them to wider audiences so they can be the filmmakers of the future.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great, man. I love that. Giving back. It's always important.
What do you think about Dunkirk?
Dunkirk is probably this side of Tenet, it is my least favorite Nolan film. Not because Nolan isn't an incredible director in this film, not because he doesn't tell a poignant story in this movie. I think it's one of these films that you either are fully in or you're fully out. And by that, because of the choice he makes here to tell the story without a one-person through line throughout the whole movie. You're jumping from situation to situation to situation. And I never really feel the connection with any of the characters. So for me, except for the Tom Hardy stuff, which I think is great. So for me, I lose the emotional heartbeat of the movie as I'm watching it. Everything, the war sequences, the things they go through are very well directed, but I don't care, right? I don't find myself caring. Whereas Oppenheimer, which is also a World War II connected movie, I'm invested, because it's a through line of Oppenheimer. There's not that in Dunkirk. And so I'm like, it's like, oh, hey, can you, it almost feels like you're riding along with someone and then they throw you into another car and you have to be like, okay, well, who's here in this car? And like, oh, okay, you're going back to this car. And so it's not, you don't get the chance to really connect with one person. And at times I found myself confusing some of the main actors of the story segments we were following.
Right.
And I was like, is this the same person as, and so it just became an issue for me overall. So I understand that people love it. I know for some people it's their favorite Nolan film, and I respect that completely. Just for me, it just does not work for me, and I find myself bored with the movie, which is a rare thing for me to say about Nolan.
Well, the interesting thing to me that Nolan said about it was, and again, this kind of goes to his philosophy, is that his feeling was every single person in that movie was living in an entirely different reality.
Yeah.
Because nobody sees the top-down view of everything that's going on. They can only see it from, I am on this boat heading to try to pick up these soldiers, or I am stranded on this beach, or I am this pilot. And they don't know everything else that's going on. And that disjointed feel, I mean, this is the thing about him is because he's pushing the envelope so hard and pushing perception so hard that not everyone's going to hang on,
Yeah.
Not everyone is going to be, and when he does it, so like, I think Memento is it's a much simpler movie, but he really knows he's keeping everybody in, despite the fact that we're going back in time and the guy doesn't have memory and we don't know what's going on. Whereas in Dunkirk, my feeling about Dunkirk, I think I like it more than you do, but I feel like, to me, it's almost, I'm not saying it's like watching TV in the sense of TV being lesser than film, but it played better for me when I kind of popped in and out and I watched 25 minutes of a sequence and then kind of came back and watched a different sequence. Whereas all together as one thing, I don't know if I feel like it adds up in the way to, at the end, I go, wow, that was amazing. It's each individual thing is amazing, Yeah.
Agreed. And I think the performances are fantastic. I love the boat sequence with Mark Rylance and the young kid. God, the young kid is a good actor. He's a great actor now, I think. And like seeing what they're doing to try to save the people so the sequences themselves are very well directed. Like with Brana and all the explosions happening as they're standing there waiting to be saved. Like all of that makes sense. But you don't give me someone to connect to. If you do Titanic, you don't have Jack and Rose, I don't think you're going to like the movie.
Yeah.
I don't think that movie makes $2 billion or $1 billion like it did, because the emotional heartbeat of the story is what you're touching base with throughout all these things that are happening and the madness that's happening with the ship snapping into and sinking. And so I think that's a thing that's missing in Dunkirk. And again, for the people who love it, I am not denigrating anyone who's listening to us who loves it, because it works for you. And I respect that. But for me, it doesn't. And it keeps it from being one of the films I genuinely love, because I think it would have been, because I love World War II shit, it would have been if I cared about any of these characters aside from Tom Hardy.
It's funny, by the way. I haven't done this, but I think it would be a fun experiment is to watch this in tandem with Darkest Hour, because that's the story. I mean, it's so fucking good, and that's the Churchill side of what's going on in this movie. And I think you really put your finger on something, and it makes me go back and give Leonardo DiCaprio even more respect, which is that when things are missing from Nolan movies, it is usually that human part. I mean, like starting right with Memento, I really feel for that guy. It is very human, but there's also a distance because he's so different. He's so hard to understand. And so like that, and as we said in Dark Knight Rises, it's sort of like, I didn't feel it in the way that
Right.
I wanted to feel it, even though there was all these emotional things going on.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
One thing I want to share with you is that apparently Christopher Nolan went to see Steven Spielberg before going to make his World War II movie, as you do, because if you're Christopher Nolan, you can do that. And this is what Spielberg said that he told him. He said, knowing and respecting that Chris is one of the world's most imaginative filmmakers, my advice to him was to leave his imagination, as I did on Saving Private Ryan, in second position to the research he was doing to authentically acquit the historical drama. I think that is a master filmmaker thing to say to another master filmmaker. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't think Spielberg could ever be accused of making a movie that doesn't have at least an attempt to create emotional through line.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All of his movies.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's,
But it's the imagination thing that I find so interesting, because Nolan's movies are so imaginative, Inception being the most ridiculous. And Spielberg too, like you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, and every shot it gives you this sense of delight and experience. And you watch the opening of Saving Private Ryan, which is obviously brilliant, but it's not imaginative. You know what I mean? Like he's like going, look at this reality.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really, and it's always interesting to me. He didn't say don't be an imaginative.
Right.
He just said move that to second place. And I think that's an incredible piece of advice. As I mentioned, he's very experimental with sound and music, and doesn't see a strong barrier between sound and music.
Yeah.
So that sounds of engines, he made sure that the composer and the sound guys were always sharing their audio files. So audio files of a sound effect would find their way into the score, and pieces of score end up being used as sound. And so what I love about this, when the movie got nominated for Best Sound Editing and won, and the sound editor insisted that the music editor also receive an Oscar.
Wow.
Because he's like, we did this together. There was no normally there's sound editing over here and music editing over there. And that just wasn't the case for Dunkirk, which I love.
That's great. I love that.
And now we get to Tenet. And I want to lay out for you.
Sure.
Just, as I said, I read this book, and and Nolan likes to fuck with people's heads. And there was one a question that he had asked the interviewer at the beginning of the book that came back over and over again. And the more that I think about it, the more I think it explains a ton about Nolan. Yeah. Which is, he asked, I wish I had exactly how he phrased the question, but basically, how do you describe left and right to someone if you're not with them? And the reason he brings it up, and I had never heard this, but this is an old school philosophical sort of riddle, because there actually is no definition of left-rightness that exists away from a human experiencing something. So if I say like, which way is north? Well, the north-south line is magnetic to the poles. There's a physical thing in the universe. If I say up or down, well, up is farther from the center of the earth than down is. If I say left or right, but you're not there, there's no thing that describes leftness, you know, like left. And what's interesting, and they kept coming back to it as like the Zen riddle of this whole book over and over again. And I feel like this is where I've sort of got to, because is that in a Nolan movie, particularly the great ones, and also in Tenet, orienting yourself is always a problem. We never know exactly where we are. There is no answer to actually answer where are you and what is happening in an exact way. We cannot define it. And I think that just shows a lot of how Nolan sees life and humans in the world.
Yeah, and I think Tenet is, here's what I'll say to you, because it's like, this is what I think about Nolan. After Dark Knight Rises, I think Nolan has a crisis of confidence. And I don't mean that as a judgment on the man. I think he's stung a little bit by some of the reception to The Dark Knight Rises, because I think he didn't want to come back and do it, and that he even spent time to do it, and it turned out not to be good. There's a sense of like, well, who am I? What have I done? Yeah. I'm shaken a little bit. And listen, you said it earlier, like he didn't know what people were going to think about Memento, and that gap of time between the movie ending and that is still within every filmmaker. No matter how much everyone kisses your ass, you're always worried that you're going to make that film that people don't like, because that happens to every filmmaker, And so all the great ones have a film that didn't work or wasn't that great. Look at 1941 for Spielberg, for God's sake.
Yeah.
And so I think this is his mad genius era, is what I think these movies are. Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet. These are mad genius. He is like, who am I? And so he takes on these films. And listen, I may be way off base. I've never met the man. This is just my assessment of it. And I think these are things that inspire him and excite him. I'm going to tell a story about space. I'm a science and all of this shit go back and forth. And I'm going to make a commentary about human relationships and love, how important love is and how it can transcend time and physics and all of that. It's an amazing story. And I love it. Again, this is my favorite, Then you go to Dunkirk and it's like, well, I'm going to tell a story without an emotional through line necessarily. And we're going to go all over the place with this. And I'm going to make it feel like what war would actually feel like if you were on the outside, if you were one of the soldiers on the ground. You wouldn't know what was going on with that guy or this guy or this guy or that guy. And so you're like, okay, this is a really unique way to tell a World War II story. And then you go to Tenet and he's fucking with time travel now. And he's always been, obviously it's Memento, and following even messing with time and all that timey-wimey Doctor Who shit. So it's like, this is, I'm going way the fuck on out there with this. Like I'm going way the fuck, and I'm challenging the audiences and all of this shit. And just to add to my madness, I'm going to force the studio to release this movie during COVID to make people go to the theater to see this movie who might catch COVID to see my movie. This is the kind of stuff that you have going on. So I think these three films are his mad genius era, working out his anger, maybe his frustration of Dark Knight Rises. And he's like going, well, I did what the studio wanted me to do. I want to do what I want to do with these movies and be who I am with no restraints. And the great ones can do that and have the space to do that. And that's why we love them, because the great ones are just one shade away from being mad geniuses. And so this is what you see as him in these three movies, because I do think these are the three most divisive movies in his entire repertoire. I mean, Dark Knight Rises aside, I think when you look, because I don't think there's much genius in Dark Knight Rises, but I do think in Interstellar, Dunkirk, and Tenet, there is genius working here, mad genius working here. And I that's why I kind of put these films these three films in a special place before we get to Oppenheimer.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And the thing is when you're a person, I mean, I think that doing something scary, doing something that's never been done, approaching a film in a different way, I think that's what gets his creative juices flowing.
Oh, 100%.
But when you push it, if you continue to push the envelope, eventually the envelope will break. And this is kind of what I meant when I was talking about degree of difficulty, is that Tenet, the degree of difficulty to get us to even understand what the fuck is going on is so high. And if you miss it, like here's a perfect comparison. Mandalorian and Grogu versus Tenet. Mandalorian and Grogu deliver, it's fine.
Very simple.
It's like we had some big action sequences, we had a couple of joke things, and it's fine. And so if it misses, if it only gets to a 70%, it's a C movie, it's still fine. Whereas Tenet has to get to 96%, and it really has to pull something off for it to succeed in any way. And for me, maybe I'd had a couple of drinks when I watched Tenet, because I watched it. I didn't go to the theater to see it. But this is what I did. I went back because I was like, and I did this for a few of these. If I hadn't watched them again recently, I'd go to Wikipedia, read through the plot summary, get myself, oh yeah, that's what happens in that movie. Yeah, okay, I remember that. Oh, I remember that character. All right, no problem. I did the same thing with Tenet. No fucking idea. I read the whole plot and I'm like, nope, I'm just as confused as I was before. I was, and it's like, watching the movie, there's tons of moments where you're like, this is astounding,
Right.
It's like when you see The Matrix for the first time or something. Yeah. Like they're doing so many things. Yeah. Except I just wasn't trying to hang on by my fingernails to some involvement in the story. But I was like, I don't know if we're going forwards or backwards, and it's cool, but I don't know what's happening.
Well, I think, and this is where you brought up something that's really interesting about the DiCaprio stuff and the human story. Yeah. I think John David Washington is a perfectly fine actor, but I ain't confusing him with DiCaprio. And I ain't confusing him even with Robert Pattinson, who I think is a much better actor. I think John David is fine, but he ain't his dad. And I think when you look at this, here's an actor who maybe didn't challenge Nolan, didn't push him on this. Where are we going? What's the emotional story? What is going on here? And it's much more, how can I say this? It's much more of a kind of heist type of energy to it, but not as deep or as layered as, or accessible even as Inception is. And I wonder if a different actor, if his dad or another actor who really questions and challenges him, like Yahya Abdul-Mateen has become an incredible actor over the last few years for us. I mean, he's always been, right? But like really taking on these things. And what he finds in these characters are fascinating. Even something like the Man on Fire series, which is a little flawed overall. I think it's enjoyable, but it's a little flawed. You can see that he is working on so many emotional levels, even within a bit of a flawed piece like this. And so I would have loved to have seen how Yahya might have challenged Nolan to make this a little more accessible, a little more of the emotional story of the character that John David Washington plays, seeing more of that peppered throughout the film so that I care more about what's going on, you know? And I have a friend, Griffin Schiller, who I love and respect. He loves this movie. Like, he loves it. A lot of
people do.
And he got it. Like, he got it from the first time he saw it. He got it. And it's like, because Griffin's mind is a very interesting mind because he's always moving mentally. And so to me, this appealed to him, I think, because it spoke his mental language. And there are people, as you said, who do love it, who it speaks their mental language. And again, no disrespect if you love it, right? Because it worked for you. It doesn't make you smarter than anyone else, by the way. I want to make that fucking clear too, right off the bat. But you got it, and that's okay. You got it, and you're into it, you love it. And there's a frustration from those people that the majority of the public doesn't get Tenet. Right? But the thing is, that's a bad thing. Because Nolan shouldn't be making movies that only 10% of the people get. Like, that's not where this is at. And I think that's not his calling card. He likes to make intelligent features that a majority of the public can understand and get into and be challenged by. This was the one step too far. I think he flew too. Yeah, he was Icarus flying too close to the sun. You know.
Well, this is the whole job of the filmmaker. One of the jobs of the filmmaker, on some levels, is to have people get it. If and this is, I mean, again, this is, I'm not trying to make this the argument again, but this is sort of the objective, subjective thing to me is like, if 80% of your audience got the movie versus a movie where 20% of the audience got it, that's objectively different. Again, subjectively, they can like it, not like it. That's not my point. Right. You know, like the thing about, it's funny. I'm thinking through your John David Washington thing, and I'm going like the way Tenet works as opposed to the way Inception works makes it so much harder to, I agree with you, but to pull it off, because Inception, we're going into dreams. Dreams are a perfect place to explore human things. And dreams is where his story with his wife happened. Dreams is where his wife is haunting him. Dreams is where he's seen the visions of the past. And so they figured out ways to stack what they were doing in terms of the plot with what we were doing in terms of the emotion. For his character his character is literally named the protagonist. He's a characterless person. And so yes, I agree with you. That's a problem at a certain point, you know?
Well, if you look at the movie, if you assess that through the prism of the movie now, I absolutely hear you. But I think if you'd had a more active lead actor who was challenging, I think we'd have had a completely different movie, which would have made much more sense. And I think people would have gotten more on board with what you were trying to do. I mean, even Interstellar works because you love McConaughey and you love Anne Hathaway. Listen, I'm not the biggest Anne Hathaway person, but when she nails it, she nails it. And she nailed it in Interstellar. And I like that she gets greedy about what she wants. It's very human, you know. I don't hate her for it. And I love that because the performance is so raw. And so is McConaughey's. And so those are the things. And he's out there. I mean, Nolan is out there with the Interstellar stuff, like what he's investigating, what he's exploring. And a lot of people don't like that ending. A lot of people don't hate, but I love it. But because I care about the characters, I like where he took me. And with Tenet, there is a coldness that mirrors Dunkirk. And it may be why both of those films are my least favorite of his resume, on his resume of movies, because I don't care about these characters and what they're going through. Plus, for fuck's sake, can someone stop Branagh from ever doing a Russian accent again? He cannot do it. They're terrible. He did it in the fucking Jack Ryan movie, whatever it was, the one with Chris Pine. He's just terrible at the Russian accent. He really is. And it drives me nuts that Nolan let him do that nonsense in this movie. It's not that far away from Malkovich and Rounders, for God's sake.
But I love Malkovich in Rounders.
Right. That's a better accent because it's distinct. It's distinct. Right.
Well, and the more important thing is I love the character that he's playing in Malkovich, where the character in Tenet, I mean, there's just such a distance between getting emotionally involved. And I didn't want to talk about Interstellar too much, but you just made me realize it just pointed it out perfectly, which is, as I've said, like my way of looking at film is this distinction between story and plot, and that most of the time story is what keeps us involved. And Interstellar is a perfect example. The plot of that movie is we have to save the Earth.
Yes,
it's time, all this time stuff, and we have to do these, big trips, and we have to go down to the planet. That's the plot. The story is a love story between a man who had to leave his daughter and the daughter who missed him. And and the movie starts right off the bat with story.
Yes.
It is, we are so deeply involved in Murph and Cooper and her not saying goodbye to him and him's terrible feelings of guilt. That's what makes, I won't say that's what makes the movie great, because all the time stuff and the space trip and all that stuff is fucking great.
It's amazing.
But if you didn't have father-daughter, we wouldn't be talking about the movie on the Cine-Files.
Exactly. You don't go on the journey without the father-daughter stuff. And I think sometimes Nolan, when he's left to his own devices, he forgets that that's really important. And I think because Nolan is an intellectual guy. Yeah. And again, I wonder about his relationship with his wife. Like, is he at times aloof? Is he at times distant? Is he at times cold? Does he disappear into his cave, the caves of his mind for a long time? And so there's a bit of guilt, because he also is a humanist. There's a bit of guilt with a lot of these main characters and their relationships. I wonder if that's his way of working that out in his films and in his scripts. And so to me, I think that's where the films that don't work are when he doesn't understand how important that is to establish that with the films. And again, if you like them, that's totally fine. But I think that's why a majority of the public don't like Dunkirk or Tenet as well as they like the other films that he's done.
Well, and it also goes to, like, I can't call these bad movies. I mean, these are movies made by a master filmmaker, and you will see master filmmaking throughout. And I actually think this is a perfect transition to the next movie, which, again, we're not going to talk about very much. Yeah. But I think the theory that we're really starting to lock down is that Nolan is an idea guy and loves to explore these complex, mind-fuckery ideas.
Yeah.
And when he can do that and link it to deep, personal, emotional stuff, he'll make a great film. And to me, that sums up Oppenheimer perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Well, the complexity of his plots and thoughts and the concepts he wants to explore have to be matched by the complexity of human relationships.
Exactly.
Because there is no science that is as complex as human relationships. None. And I think that's what's important. People want to say, oh, love is so simple. Oh, he loved Murph. But that's the complexity of relationships. And they are just as nuanced or intrinsic or as difficult to figure out as any fucking formula that Will Hunting was figuring out on the fucking board. Like, all of that is important. Take me where you want to take me. Challenge me mentally. Do I have to read a whole book to understand what the fuck you're talking about in the film? Great. I love that. I love the challenge. But give me someone to care about, because then I don't give a fuck. And you've got to mirror that in what you're doing. And he does it so well in Oppenheimer. I think this is his greatest film. And I love it. I love the movie. I've watched it like 6 times now. I love it.
I've seen it twice. And not only do I think that it is his greatest film, to me, without question, it might be the greatest film of the last decade. And it might be the greatest film of the 21st century. I don't know. But it's up there. It's in the top 10 for me for the last 20 years. I think it is an incredible film. And it's funny. I'll just say, I had a moment when you said human relationships are more complicated than any science. I had a classically Steve Morris moment of going, well, John, is it? And then in the next second, I went, no, John is absolutely 100% right. The variables that exist between humans are so unbelievably complicated and change with every moment to moment, person to person, location to location. Yeah. And I think in Oppenheimer, what he does is he does. I remember when we did Lawrence of Arabia that David Lean had a quote about what defined an epic. And what he said is that it is the big mixed with the small. It is the wide shot mixed with the close-up, and which describes Lawrence of Arabia perfectly, because it is an incredibly personal story told on this vast canvas. That's what Oppenheimer is. Oppenheimer is a very personal movie.
Yes. Yes. I think he sees himself in Oppenheimer. In the quiet moments, I think Nolan does understand he's a bit of a genius. And what is his responsibility to that genius, to what he's making? Just like what is Oppenheimer's responsibility, this bomb that he's making and how it can change the world, you know? And so I think this is where you see, and I think he learned lessons from Tenet. I think he was damaged by Tenet. And so there was something about going back here and really applying himself 100% and working that storyline. And I imagine Cillian Murphy, who is no slouch, he's a very proud actor, was like, I want to explore the humanity of this character. I want to know what we're doing with this character. And it led him to an Oscar. So it just made all the sense in the world. So, because I'm not a nuclear scientist, I don't understand nuclear physics and all this kind of shit. I'm not smart enough to do that. But I got into what he was going on because of how much I cared about what Oppenheimer was going through. And are there still issues? Yes. Again, here comes another relationship with a difficult relationship with his wife, another character, difficult relationship with his wife. What is that all about? There, all of that is there as well. And so, you know, this is another way to kind of work the same themes out that he's been exploring with a lot of his male characters that are protagonists of his movies. And so, but like this whole thing that you are going through and what he's, in essence, what he's being questioned about, I would not be surprised if there's an element of this that appealed to him. Because in essence, some people were coming after him after Tenet saying he might have lost it, you know, kind of like Jason Lucas, is that the actor's name? He's trying to take his security clearance away from him. In a way, you could argue that those are the fans who were questioning if Nolan still had it. Maybe he's not as great as he once was, taking that status away from him. So there's a lot here that I think Nolan was working out himself through the character of Oppenheimer. You know?
Well, I mean, if Nolan, and this is, you know, the jury is still out. I'm not saying the jury is out that Nolan's a great filmmaker, but whether or not he will join the ranks of the 50-year directors who continued to be great throughout, you know, the Kurosawas and Spielbergs and Scorseses and Billy Wilders, like whether or not he'll be there, every one of those guys had their bad movies.
Yes.
You know, everyone, you know, it's like Martin Scorsese after New York.
Yeah.
You know, he's in a dark place, and then he comes back and makes Raging Bull. You know what I mean? Like, so I bet it is. I bet Tenet did freak him out, and I bet that was probably good for Oppenheimer. You know,
right? Yeah.
And obviously, we're gonna have a lot more to say about Oppenheimer. I'm gonna reread that Oppenheimer book. We're gonna go into a lot of study. We're gonna do a lot of research, and that is gonna come up during our season of Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, this could be our first 10-parter, Steve. For fuck's sake.
I know, it's very possible. And so here's what's going to happen. So this is our bio of him. Coming up next is going to be Interstellar, which I had forgotten that it was a 2-hour and 50-minute movie.
Oh, yeah.
So it's going to be at least 3 parts. And then we're going to roll right into Oppenheimer, which my guess is going to be 4 parts.
Yeah.
So we're going to be spending a lot of time with Christopher Nolan. And I, for one, am extremely excited about it.
I am as well. And this has been a great conversation to relive some of his stuff and kind of also work out my own ideas and feelings that I haven't talked about with anybody about Christopher Nolan this extensively rather. And I've appreciated this and had fun with this conversation. We hope everyone who's listening to us had fun with our back and forths as well. And I hope you all are looking forward to these 2 movies, because I know Steve and I are very, very excited to dive into both of these movies and see what we think about them. And there are movies that come along, Steve, in our resume that we're like, okay, here we fucking go. And I think these 2 are it. Yeah.
And of course, we'd love to hear all of your thoughts too. And social media is the place for you to share them, whether it's on Facebook, where you can do a search for the Cine-Files, on X, where it's Cine_Files, Cine-Files Podcast, on Instagram, or you could reach out to me at SR Morris. John, how would people reach you?
You can always find me at The Rocha Says on social media, and head on over to my YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/John Rocha Says. Appreciate you all. If you could subscribe to that channel, really trying to get to 50,000 subscribers on that so I can attract more people to be interviewed from the world of film as well on that channel. And of course, don't forget our own YouTube channel there, the Cine-Files YouTube channel you can sign up for. And as I said before, please remember, if you hear a product or service during these ads that you want to try out, remember to use our code so those people keep coming back to support us here on the show.
And of course, to support the show, you could also do so at Apple Podcasts, where there's been a whole bunch of new subscribers recently, which is very, very cool. Or at patreon.com/the Cine-Files, which I'll let you in on a little secret. We are getting off of this recording, and in 3 minutes, we're jumping on with our June advisory board meeting, and we cannot wait to talk to them about great films and the future of the Cine-Files. And you can join us there by just going to Patreon. And so I think that is it for this week. Get ready for a whole lot of Christopher Nolan coming your way on the Cine-Files.